We actually have quorum at 9:34, which is terrific, as it should be. And so we will start and welcome everybody here this morning. And I will just remind people that they can follow the meeting on their computer, tablet, or smartphone at www.toronto.ca/council, or you can watch us on YouTube at Toronto City Council Live. Are there any declarations under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? And if so, please indicate the item number and the nature of the interest. This is for members of the committee. All right, hearing none, we'll proceed then. May I have a motion to confirm the minutes of the Executive Committee meeting of April 18th, 2016? Moved by Councillor Pasternak, seconded by Councillor McMahon. All those in favour? Opposed? Carry. Let's then proceed with a review of the agenda, and if you want to hold an item, please state your name and say hold. Item 15.1 will be held for deputations. Item 15.2 will be held for deputations. 15.3, Invest Toronto Annual General Meeting and 2015 Audited Financial Statements. Moved by Councillor Crawford. Seconded by Councillor Basso. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. I am going to hold item 15.4, if I may. 15.5, Toronto Port Lands Company Annual Meeting and Audited Statements. Could we just can't hear a thing, and if we could just close that door, and if we have to have people go around the other door, it's just too noisy. I think we should just have people go around. If there's going to be a big crowd out there, that's no problem, but it's just too noisy. All right, item 15.5, Port Lands Company, a motion to adopt. Moved by Councillor Crawford, Councillor Menon Wong. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Police and Fire Games, 15.6. Moved by Deputy Mayor Menon Wong. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. The 15.7 is being held for deputations. 15.8 is being considered after lunch as the first time after lunch, a statutory matter. 15.9. Motion to adopt 15.9. Moved by Councillor
Mayor Tory, I'd like to hold that.
Oh, sorry. Councillor Shiner is going to hold that, and there are deputations as well. 15.10, redevelopment of Toronto Transit Commission lands at Yonge Eglinton.
Could I hold that as well, please?
Councillor Shiner will hold that. 15.11, Aboriginal Employment Strategy Update.
Hold, please. Hold.
Being held by Councillor Ainsley. 15.12, I have a motion on that. We'll hold that. We're going to put, I could put the motion now and dispose of it. It was just an amendment. Pardon me? Somebody else want to hold it? No, let's do it. Okay, the motion simply, can we put it up? Do you think you have it, Madam Clerk? Yeah. There it is there. It simply adds the words such report to include a jurisdictional scan of other Canadian municipalities in Canada with large Aboriginal populations and whether those jurisdictions have established Aboriginal Affairs offices to address issues within that community. I thought it would be very useful for us to see that in the context of the recommendation. So that is the simple amendment. Can we have a motion to, I move that amendment as amended. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. 15.13, Toronto 2017 plans. Nobody holding it. Motion to adopt. Moved by Councillor Pasternak. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. 15.14, relocation of Hollis Early Learning and Child Care Centre. Moved by Councillor Crawford. Any other? Okay. Seconded by Councillor McMahon. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Adjustment to the 2016-2025 capital budget for Parks, Forestry and Recreation for 47 Cedar Crest Boulevard. Moved by Councillor Crawford, seconded by Councillor Robinson. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Adjustments to the Parks, Forestry and Recreation 2016 capital budget and capital plan. Moved by, again, Councillor Crawford. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Facilities, Real Estate, Environment and Energy capital budget. Capital plan adjustments, accelerations and deferrals for the second quarter, 15.17.
Hold, please.
Held by Councillor Crawford. Operating variance report for the 3 months ended March 31st, 2016. Moved by Councillor Crawford. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. 15.19, capital variance report for 3-month period, March 31st, 2016. Again, moved by Budget Chair Councillor Crawford. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Disability Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee request, re-TTC 15.20. That moved by Councillor DeGiorgio, seconded Councillor Palacio. All those in favor, opposed, carried. 15.21, Provincial Review of Special Investigations Unit processes for cases involving individuals living with mental illness. Is that moved by Councillor Palacio? All right, seconded. All those in favor, opposed, carried. 15.22, Toronto Police Service Annual Hate, Bias, Crime Statistical Report.
Can I hold up?
Motion held by Councillor Ainsley. 15.23, overhaul of 30 Canadian light rail vehicles and maintaining non-overhauled streetcars in a state of good repair. All those moved by Councillor Palacio. All those in favor, opposed, carried. Federal infrastructure funding. Again, I have a very short motion that which we could dispose of now if the clerk could put it up. It's just that the Executive Committee refer this item to the City Manager for consideration of these projects alongside other requests of the federal government for infrastructure funding. It's really just to make sure we left hand, right hand knows what it's doing. Did you want to? Sure, we can, absolutely. We'll hold that. World-class digital city, open data strategic plan. I think you have some amendments, Councillor Ainsley. Does that mean we best deal with it later?
I think there's some deputants.
Pardon me?
Deputants.
Oh, there are deputants as well, okay. 15.26, request for establishment of term limits for council member appointments to agencies, boards, commissioners, and corporations. Again, there's deputations on that. 15.27, beg pardon? Yeah, we have I think Councillor Baila wants to add some, I think we want to just, I have it, no, it's just it's a motion, I think. Okay. So I'm going to move that we add an item to the agenda so we can coordinate our response. It's the letter that's in front of you on pink paper, which is on the mayor's letterhead dated May 24th, 2016. May I have a motion to add that to the agenda? Moved by Councillor McMahon. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. So those will sit there together then. And then we also have, I think Councillor Bilo has one to do with the College Promenade BIA streetscape. And you move that that be added to the agenda as new business. Moved by Councillor Bilo. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And then finally, Councillor Palacio has the earthquake disaster relief assistance for Ecuador. Move that be added to the agenda. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Now back to the rundown. Where was I? I've lost the paper now. Here it is. It's yeah, we'll do that, but I just have I've misplaced. Oh, here it's under here. 1, 2, 3. So that's the end. Okay. May I also have your concurrence to deal with a couple of timing matters. If you look at the list of deputies, we have a very large number of speakers registered on 15.7, the recommendations for future mega international event bidding and hosting, and that I would recommend that we time that item as the second item of the day to be finished after we finish the 15.1, the financial matters that we're going to start up with this morning. The only caveat I put on that is that obviously at 1:30 we have to deal with the statutory matter concerning the development charges, because that requires particular procedural rules to be followed. So what will happen is we'll deal with the financial matter. As soon as we finish that, if we finish before 1:30, we can move on to the international events bidding. If not, we'll move at 1:30 to the statutory matter concerning development charges, and then move after that to the international events matter. Did you have a comment or a question?
Yep, Mayor Tory, item 15.10, redevelopment of Toronto Transit Commission lands at Yonge and Eglinton. It has a confidential motion attached to it, a report attached to it. I have some questions that I'm going to try to deal with staff in advance, and I may have some slight amendments, but we may want to put a time to that so our folks at Build Toronto and TTC don't have to stay here all day for that.
I'd be more than happy to do that for that reason, but maybe we could tell them they could come back not
That's
earlier than
so
3 o'clock. I hate to say it. I wish I could say.
What time?
Pardon me?
So if there's a time in the afternoon after lunch sometime.
Or 4 o'clock. I mean, because if you look at it, the financial matter I think will take a good part of the morning because there's quite a few deputants. Then we have the statutory matter at 1:30. And then we have the Expo matter, which has 27 or so deputants. And so I think if we wanted to tell them a time to come back, being realistic, it would be like 4 o'clock.
I'm fine with that, and if I can resolve it in advance with a motion I could put forward and just circulate, I will. But can we say 4 o'clock for the in-camera?
Yeah, I mean, I can't be guaranteed it'll be on at 4, but at least it prevents them sitting here between now and 4.
Yes.
Yeah, well, yeah, we're suggest the staff come back at 4 o'clock, and then we can deal with it at 4 if we're able to do so.
So 15?
With it, we should be so fortunate, Councillor Shiner. With your indulgence and assistance, we might be able to actually do that. Any other comments before we...
So 15.10 will be at 4 o'clock?
15.7 will be after 15.1. 15.10, we will advise the staff that it will be 4 o'clock or later, but hopefully around 4 o'clock. So then, may I have a motion to approve we have to approve the order paper and the timing matters that I've just gone through?
I'll
by
move
Councillor Shiner. All those in favour? Opposed? Carry.
And Mayor Tory, could we see if it's finally springtime, if the air conditioning is getting turned on in the building?
You know, the air does feel dead. It just feels like it's not moving in here. Maybe somebody could
I don't want to use the
check
word
into
dead.
that. Well,
I
no,
don't want
but
to use the word
it does feel
stale,
dead. It feels dead.
but it is warm.
I'll use it. What's that? Hot air, yeah, that's it, yeah. Okay, now, what we're going to do with your concurrence, ladies and gentlemen, is we're going to hear the city manager's presentation first before we hear the deputations, on the basis that perhaps his presentation will answer some of the questions deputants have. It'd be useful for us all to hear it. And so if everybody's in concurrence, we'll hear from the city manager and then proceed to deputations on 15.1 and then on from there.
All right. Thank you so much, Mayor Tory.
Just before you start, Mr. Wallace, there's a large crowd of people in here. There's a lot of people standing up. And I'm going to have to ask for your indulgence in making sure there isn't that buzz, especially when we turn on the air conditioning. So if you could just keep the hubbub down. We need to hear the city manager's presentation and all the deputants. So please, over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Mayor Tory. I'm Peter Wallace, City Manager, and with me, as you know, is Roberto Rossini, Deputy City Manager and Chief Financial Officer. The report in front of you today has been signed by me and all 3 of our Deputy City Managers. That's a reflection of our shared concern with respect to the long-term financial stability of the city. We are concerned that each year we are able to achieve annual balance.
Mayor Tory, I'm fighting to hear.
Yeah, we've got people standing up, and I'm delighted you're here. But I would seriously have to consider asking people to leave the room if we can't. If we could please just be quiet, that would be great, just so we can hear a very important presentation from Mr. Wallace. Thank you.
The guts of the report is trying to understand why it is that previous city managers, previous CFOs, large numbers of academic studies and others have always expressed core concerns with respect to the long-term financial structure of the city. And there is a very powerful narrative there that indicates from just a basic perspective that as we decrease reliance on our core revenue source, which is property tax, and yet increase expense, clearly there is some type of tension in the system. Yet on an annual basis, the city has been able to cobble together balanced budgets, and there has been a certain sense of comfort that it looks like everything will work out just fine. What this report does is essentially explore and try and understand why it is that on an annual basis we've been able to balance the budget, and how that may not be indicative, how the circumstances that allowed that to happen may not be sustainable in future. So if I can jump to slide 4. So this is the basic financial picture of the city, and you'll see that in combination with almost all organization, has natural tendency to grow. And you'll see that that growth is part of two things. There is a base component, and then each year we add a little bit new of enhanced, and then that new and enhanced in turn compounds, and that's the nature of the yellow bar. But this is basically the fiscal pattern of the City of Toronto over the last number of years. This is in nominal recurrent dollars. It's a relatively uninteresting chart because it shows the numbers at such a level of aggregation. So it is important to look at what happens on an annual basis, and that's the next slide, slide 5. And what this shows is there's actually a very distinct pattern associated with our change in overarching expenditure. And this is, again, in nominal or current dollars. And you'll see that the last 6 years have had very moderate expense growth of about 2.3% on an annual average basis, in contrast to a rate of growth that was 6 or so percent in the years prior to 2010. And I'll explore in turn what actually constitutes the numbers over the last 6 years and spend a little bit of time doing that. One thing I should emphasize here is that these are all in numbers. So what we try and show is basically the full cost of governance to the people who pay for the City of Toronto. So that includes all of our tax, property tax, land transfer tax, the full costs associated with water, wastewater, user fees, TTC, anything along like that, basically to give the truest possible perspective of the overall cost and the overall benefits of the City of Toronto. So what we're stepping away from here is the usual and somewhat overly narrow net basis to take a look in aggregate at what is the financial impact of the city. And you'll see that that financial impact of the city, while it's grown very moderately over the last number of years, if you actually adjust for both in inflation and population, so the most core indication of affordability of city operations. The other core indication would be share of GDP, but we'll use this one for the moment. You'll see that, in fact, costs have been essentially constant or actually a moderate decline over a period of time. And what's particularly important, and we'll spend a few minutes in the next several slides, exploring the composition of this change. Because this composition, it's what's happened underneath these numbers that has allowed the budget to be balanced on an annual basis. So if I can now flip to expense, and this is for the last 6 years. And the yellow bar is the rate program. So council a number of years ago made a core decision, largely with respect to water, but also with respect to Toronto Parking Authority and solid waste, that it would run these on a rate-supported basis. And Toronto Water was at the time in a crisis where the city had not put in appropriate resources to manage a number of core issues with respect to the sustainability of the system. Council made a decision at that point in time, extended over a period of time, to essentially raise rates on a very, very substantial basis in order to cope with the infrastructure deficit. That has been a very successful strategy that has largely mitigated the infrastructure deficit, not fully. That's why the rates continue to increase over the foreseeable future, but done a huge service in terms of mitigating that or addressing that infrastructure deficit. So what you have is, over that period of time, the largest single area of expense growth, 24%, is on the rate base. That's irrelevant from a fiscal standpoint in that nets out, that neutralizes, and we'll see that on the next slide associated with revenue as well. But that 24% has been matched by that 24% of expense has essentially been self-balancing or internally hedged from a fiscal perspective. You'll see then that most of the rest of the rates of growth are really quite moderate. You'll see that, and now this is adjusted for inflation. So importantly, what we've done here is actually taken out inflation to ensure comparability over time. And you'll see that basically debt has been rising at essentially 1% a year. Emergency services have been rising at slightly over, right about 1% a year. That 1% reflects a huge amount of efficiency in the actual delivery of emergency services, simply because we know that the labor agreements that underlie those costs have been increasing substantially more quickly than that. So emergency services have been able to cope by and large with a more complex, dense city and fairly expensive labor agreements, holding that incremental cost to about 1% each year. TTC has been growing at roughly double the rate of roughly double the overall rate, and that's a function of essentially catch-up. Where the TTC had fallen into state of good repair and other concerns, there have been investments over the last number of years to try and mitigate those, and again, somewhat similar to water, try and return the situation to a stable state. Those increases have been made possible because of a decrease in cost-shared programs. And this is a very important construct here, because while the overall rate of growth has been very moderate, what has effectively happened here is that there have been reductions in cost. And those reductions in costs have come by and large from cost-shared programs. Those are programs we share largely on the social service side with the province of Ontario. And essentially, we have been able to benefit from a decline in welfare. And effectively, while welfare rates have not been cut, the rates themselves have been the same. Two things have happened. The province has uploaded an increased share of welfare, and welfare rolls themselves have dropped. Those factors are nearing maturity, and even if welfare rolls continue to drop because of the upload, we will no longer get a benefit associated with that. So this is a set of unique circumstances over time in which we have been able to benefit very, very substantially by reducing the city's investment in shelter support and housing, and particularly in welfare programs, and direct that towards a combination of property tax relief and emergency services and TTC. This circumstance, just from a common sense perspective, this circumstance will not continue. We can reasonably expect that the expense pressures on debt will rise. Expense pressures on emergency services will continue to be there. We'll talk a little bit about TTC later in the presentation, but very clearly we cannot rely on a continued decline in the cost of cost-shared programs. There's a mirror image on the revenue slide as well, and the scale is different to accommodate the spectacular growth in land transfer tax, but that 23.9 is, again, same slide, same point we had relative to expense earlier. That is the rate program, solid waste, water, and Toronto Parking Authority offset. The provincial upload has actually increased our revenue capacity over a period of time. The very largest change has been from land transfer tax, which has actually provided almost, which has grown by over 150% over a period of time. TTC fares, a variety of others. What's particularly important here is that property taxes have actually declined. When you adjust for inflation, property taxes overall are lower than they were in 2010. So essentially, the city has, on a revenue side, been able to balance the modest increases in nominal expense. It's been able to balance that on the basis of spectacular growth in land transfer tax and essentially shifting the basis of taxation away from property tax and towards land transfer tax and fee-based. And in that fee-based, it's particularly been able to emphasize TTC ridership because that is the largest element. And there's a point in the report, and it's an important point, that Council has in fact raised taxes. The active decisions by Council to manage property taxes over a period of time have meant that property taxes have been rising very slowly. And in fact, the total incremental increase associated with property tax decisions made by this Council is actually smaller than the increase in fees paid by TTC riders over the last 6 years. So again, this model is only sustainable as long as we have very strong increases in land transfer tax And as long as we continue to experience significant changes in government transfers in other areas, it's reasonable to believe that these are likely to be mature, not likely to continue over a period of time. Just a few more slides and then we'll wrap up. The annual capital budget has been sustained over a period of time. But what is very important on the next slide is that the low rate of growth in expense actually masks Council's true intentions, because Council has been very clear with staff that it wants to have a large number of city building initiatives, and you can see them on the page, including our recent and likely upcoming conversations with respect to very, very substantial investments in transit. These are not built into the city's plan. These are exclusive of the city's plan. So essentially, the city has been able to achieve balance over a period of years through three primary mechanisms. The downs associated with savings, windfall savings associated with windfall declines in social assistance, the windfall gains associated with land transfer tax, and essentially announcing but not funding, asking staff to commit taxpayer dollars to the work on but not funding a large number of capital projects. So that's been essentially the mechanisms that have allowed for balance to be achieved on each of the last 3 years. You'll notice that I'm not putting as much emphasis on the one-time savings. That's because over a 6-year period, those one-time savings tend to cancel out. So that's not fully true for 2017 because there are fairly substantial overhangs from 15 and 16 into 2017. But over the 6-year period, it's basically been not a challenge associated with the annual one-time kind of balance dance, but these more structural basic things in terms of declines in social assistance and social spending, the increase in land transfer tax, and Council's historic practice of announcing and baking projects into our future understanding, but not providing adequate funding room for those. So that's not sustainable. And in a very real sense, the decisions to have the very difficult discussions around tax, around expenditure management, around assets were made a long time ago. They're falling due right about now. And it will be this council in this term that has to address those challenges. But the decisions, the de facto decisions to fall into these gaps were made over an extended period of time. And that extended period of time, it's a real thing, and it will require some real time and effort to get out of these. So the rest of the presentation is actually fairly traditional. What it does is it shows, in essence, on page 13, what it shows is the expense requirements over a period of time. And slide 11, excuse my apologies. What it shows is that just to keep the lights on within the existing announced programs, the requirements are basically $600 million, and they grow each year beyond that. What's different in this number is two things. First, it includes nothing about the unfinanced capital gaps. So it includes nothing about the capital. So that $29 billion capital wish list that I talked about earlier, that would add to this if Council were to make any decisions, for example, with respect to incremental transit investment. And secondly, the primary components of this are the usual inflationary pressures, but the bigger issues now are TTC and TCHC, both of which have been able to manage their pressures over a period of time. But TCHC has now reached a point of inflection where it cannot manage within its current fiscal context. The Mayor's task force is crystal clear to that effect. And secondly, the TTC has indicated that a combination of state of good repair, maintaining the system, The annualizations associated with recent investments mean that it requires the better part of $200 million next year in order to maintain existing service levels. There's a mirror image slide, which is page 13, associated with that. Just jump to page 13, which is the revenue piece. And of course, revenue in this instance remains relatively robust. Revenues of $140, $260 million worth of revenue. That is moderate revenue growth on a $10 billion overall base. But the real change here is that if we look on the next slide, City Council has over a period of time gotten used to balancing its budget on the basis of revenues rolling in during a period of spectacular growth in land transfer tax. And that growth has, basically provided almost $100 million each year. It was a $100 million increment lift 2015 to 2016. So the base revenue growth there is, maybe $200 million, and the increment associated with MLTT has supported that. We're going to fall back. There's a rule, the statistical rule, regress to the mean. We're going to regress to the mean at some point. Whether or not that actually happens in 2017 or 2018, it's inconceivable that land transfer tax will continue to grow. And the provincial uploads, which provide us with net benefit here, are coming to an end. So those two factors mean that the City of Toronto is going to have to fit within less revenue. So what we've done is we've baked in a divergence here between expense, where our deferrals have left us to the point where expense is likely to rise, and on the revenue side, the current policies mean that revenue is likely to decline over a period of time. At least that is with respect to the existing policy. And I need to be very clear, this is an all-in number. This includes all of the rate base. It builds in the proposed city building fund. It models property tax at a rate of inflation, residential property tax fixed to a rate of inflation, and it includes a variety of other things. So this is our best effort at an all-in number. You can flip to the next slide and show that obviously this shows a fairly significant gap going forward that grows over a period of time. These numbers will not be the real numbers. These numbers will be managed. Council will not allow this to happen. Staff will not allow this to happen. But they are indicative of a situation in which Council has enjoyed a relatively free ride on the basis of a series of fortuitous circumstances, has not looked on a multi-year basis going forward. Clearly, we need to change that, and clearly we need to move forward on a more strategic basis. I'm going to flip to page 17 now. 17? Oh. Yep. And just, this is a complicated chart, but it is important to show kind of the challenges we have in 2017. And there are two things that I think are striking about this. First of all, it is that the pattern of deferral contributes very strongly to the challenges in 2017. And you'll see a number of those elements bring forward, and you'll see that they are associated with prior year decisions by Council. And secondly, some of the biggest pressures are associated with agencies, particularly with TTC, which requires $160 million to keep the lights on in the existing level of service, is then facing an incremental burden associated with Presto, $29 billion. That's contractually fixed. You'll see that prior capital decisions are beginning to grow more steeply. And you'll see in particular that there's $96 million worth of TCHC pressures. So those numbers will all change. We know that many of those numbers will go down. We'll work hard to bring them down. But it gives you an indication of basically the process of kicking the can down the road will inevitably come to an end. And that inevitably comes to an end in 2017, 2018, 2019, but within the period of visibility of this council. So the last couple of slides are important, and to some extent, Council has seen this movie before. Council has been told perennially that we have a series of challenges, and what is different about this is that we are explaining clearly how it is that Council has dodged those earlier bullets and why those strategies are not available. And if you look at these, it's very clear that with any luck, and we will have very high expectations for both provincial and federal money for capital projects. Our gaps are largely on the operating side. When we get the capital money, it helps to offset that $29 billion gap, but we haven't funded that yet. So it's not a relief on our fiscal plan. We may continue to get gains from MLTT, and in fact, the MLTT numbers here are $20 million higher than they were back in December, because the property tax market continues to, property market continues to perform extremely well. Inevitably, that will reach a level of maturity. Our reserve funds are frankly in no state to be drawn down. There's an appendix that shows how they stand relative to comparable to other municipalities. The surplus for the 2016 surplus will be down around $150 million. That is 1.5% of net spend. That it essentially goes into capital. When we manage down the surplus, all we're doing is cutting the already inadequate future capital budget, and exactly the same thing if we choose to lower capital from current. So the shortcuts, the tricks that we have relied on over a period of time are not realistically available in order to bridge us forward. So that does lead to next steps, and the next steps are really to have the more challenging conversation. And we will need to make sure that we integrate our program planning, our capital asks, with our actual budgetary planning, and do not approve major areas of new expense. And this, with respect, is not the million or the $3 or the $4 million items. This is the big ticket items. This is not a battle that will be fought on the basis or won on the basis of trivial expenses. This is a very, very substantial expenditure gap, and Council will need to look at overall how it intends to address that. And that does mean linking in the Council chambers on a regular basis Council's asks with its abilities to pay or with its willingness to raise revenues from our residents and businesses in order to pay for that. That will require a multi-year expenditure management plan and a much more serious look at program review. The challenge with program review is that even in the senior governments, it is not a panacea. And program review, no matter how strongly applied in the City of Toronto, has never fully offset expense on an annual basis. So no matter how fully, no matter how strongly we emphasize, Council has been crystal clear every year over the past 6, let alone the 6 before that, that it wants to maintain the level of services, that it wants to maintain or even increase the level of services. So staff will work, agencies will work to control expense, but that alone will not be able to address the existing pressures, let alone make room for the very significant increases associated with capital financing. So effectively, that means that Council will need to look seriously at revenue measures. And I do have advice with respect to revenue measures. And municipalities are built on a relatively simple model. They are built on a property tax model. It will be imperative to make decisions in which our structural expense, the expense we cannot avoid, the expense that is embodied in one of those earlier charts that shows basically what you as Council want to deliver to our residents, be based on revenue tools that are recurring, that are stable, that do not put us at risk of a deflection or just slower growth in the property tax market. So it will be absolutely imperative to balance core expense with our core revenues. Secondly, that will not do it because Council will want to invest significantly in new capital going forward, and that is where we should direct revenue tools. That is where, as we begin to look at new sources of revenue, as we look at asset deployment, as we look at making our assets much more efficient, as we look at incremental fees, as we look at all of those other elements, my view, staff's view, is that they should be devoted to new services, new areas of city building and capital, and that we should make sure that we do not provide future councils with the hole that prior councils left you. That we, in fact, address those structural issues, that we, in fact, match revenues to expense on a going forward basis, and then to the extent we want and we do need incremental capital investment, we use incremental sources of revenue to fund that. That's our presentation, and we look forward to questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Just at the end there, I thought briefly of having a motion to extend the holiday weekend by an extra day on the 3rd. There's nothing to be done around here, but... So, what we will now do, ladies and gentlemen, with your concurrence, members of the committee, is we will move to the deputations, and then we'll come back to questions of Mr. Wallace and Mr. Rossini as you wish after we've heard from our deputants. And so we will do that, and we thank you very much for the presentation. And the first person up is Tim McGuire. Is Tim? There he is. You know the rules, Mr. McGuire, and you have 5. If you don't by now, well. You have 5 minutes, and then we may have some questions.
I will do my best to follow that rule. Again, Tim McGuire, President of QP Local 79, representing the City of Toronto inside workers and others, the people who deliver services to all of your communities on your behalf. Local 79 makes 4 recommendations arising out of this report, and then I'll speak to some points about the report and the recommendations. First, City Council should move quickly to explore new and expanded sources of revenue that provide long-term sustainable support for the operating and capital needs of the city, starting with the 2017 budget. Fire sales of profitable assets that support the city's operating budget, like Toronto Hydro, should be opposed. 2, review service level impacts of past and current efficiency measures, including gapping, when exploring future efficiency measures. 3, develop the city's promised quality job assessment tool prior to any consideration of contracting out. 4, explore whether bringing currently contracted out work back in-house can achieve cost savings. So with respect to some areas of the report, the city's long-term financial plan shows that the cupboard is bare. Toronto spending per person has dropped by 7% since 2010, with the exception of rate-based programs like water, yet the city still faces yearly budget gaps of hundreds of millions of dollars and $29 billion in unfunded capital projects. The report states, quote, recent patterns of savings and efficiencies are nearing practical limits without service changes or other direction from Council. Council has a choice to make: cut programs or grow revenue. So again, our recommendation is that the city explore new and expanded sustainable sources of revenue starting in 2017 budget, and again, reject any notion of selling profitable assets like Toronto Hydro. Services need to grow to make a more equal city. The public supports services, as evidenced by the many service reductions triggered by the core service review in 2012 being rejected due to public outcry. There have been new promises to invest in good jobs, affordable housing, childcare, and public transit because the public wants us to tackle growing inequality with services and supports. The city needs to choose a long-term city building vision. The report says we should explore more efficiencies and cost reductions before any revenue tools are implemented, but the report also shows that more efficiencies can't solve the basic fiscal deficit. The report recommends looking at selling assets like Toronto Hydro, but this will actually hurt our long-term financial sustainability. There are too many contradictions. The City Council needs to make a choice: build a city for everyone or cut back on what we have, but don't pretend there are piles of money sitting under seat cushions in City Hall or elsewhere. This is what some might refer to is a can't suck and blow moment for the city. There are hidden costs to efficiencies of the past 6 years and other years. In an effort to keep property taxes low, regressive user fees have gone up by 9% over inflation since 2010. Staff vacancies have shot up to 3,000, or almost 6%, as city divisions more than double what they were before 2010. Some divisions are near or at 20% gapping. We can't continue these service impacts. So-called efficiency must be measured against impact service levels. Last year's service level reviews repeatedly pointed to a number of challenges, and gapping is a chronic problem that's growing. Our recommendation is review service level impacts of past and current measures, including gapping, when exploring any future efficiency means. Exploring contracting out must be balanced with exploring contracting in and maintaining good jobs. Our recommendation, again, is that the city develop its promised job assessment, quality job assessment tool prior to any consideration of contracting out. That quality job assessment tool was developed to look at if the city were contracting out or in work performed by its agencies were actually good, decent jobs, and the components of what a good, decent job looks like. And the city needs to be, we've said it many times and we'll continue to say it, needs to be a leader in showing what a good job is. In the past, contracting out has led to very low wage jobs in some areas, and in some areas actually sub-minimum wage jobs. And the city can't return to this direction. So the city needs to explore bringing contracting work back in also, where cost savings can be achieved. I think the city is already reviewing its fleet service contract, where parts are provided to the city fleet. But another area where the city should look is engineering services. The city has incrementally contracted out its surveying and design for various projects, and that should be seriously looked at. There are areas, we believe, where that has led to increased costs rather than the city maintaining its ability to grow a city.
And we'll have to leave it at that, Mr. McGuire. That's 5:30, and so I thank you very much for your submissions. Are there any questions of this deputy? Thank you very much for being with us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Michael Rosenberg. Good morning, Mr. Rosenberg. You have 5 minutes. Thank you very much for being here.
Okay, I'm Michael Rosenberg. Now, you're going to basically be hearing two main messages today, I think. There's going to be the issue of priorities and allocation, and there's going to be the issue of new revenue. The staff report states that differentiated targets are a way that other cities have been successful. Now, of course, when you set a target, you don't always get the exact same percentage increase or decrease in each department, but it doesn't seem to be done intentionally. So I think it's a good thing that this report is now saying that we need to decide what kind of city we want and what kind of spending gives us that kind of city, and make some decisions as to whether some departments should get an increase and others should be held closer to a line or a decrease. I think that most of the groups here have recognized both the need for new revenues and the fact that there are some departments where do we need the amount of spending that we have. For example, information technology or police. So there are a few areas where perhaps in order to achieve the kind of city we want to see more spending on transit and housing and other services, and that one of the options is less spending on some areas that perhaps are not as directly related to the kind of city we actually want to see in the future. And I agree with the report that this is about the big money. It's not about finding a $1 million program that you don't like. It's about what is the overall direction. And, I mean, let's look at a couple of factors about the overall direction. The economy, I mean, we were talking about inflation and population. The economy has not been keeping up with inflation and population. So how is that going to look in the future? How much worse off are we going to be in the future? And that's why, for example, the direction of increasing the use of technology might be questionable, as in, is that the kind of city we want? Because the new technology is not so productive. You get a lot of information sloshing around, but do you get transit? Do you get housing? Do you get food from technology? No, you can't eat technology. So let's be careful. Maybe that's one of the areas we don't need to increase spending on in a time when the economy isn't even keeping up with inflation. So maybe we can actually help the economy by spending less on technology and have an economy that is more functional and less information-oriented. And at the same time, maybe that's one of the areas we don't need to spend so much money on. So if we can look at some of those bigger budgets and figure out what the direction of the city is. And I would like to ask, and maybe some of you can ask the staff, how would be the correct way to operationalize this request for differentiated targets? Normally the targets come out around this time of year. So before the staff budget comes out, they're given targets. So maybe you need to examine a process where by September, Council has made some decisions about what are the differentiated targets, instead of just letting that happen by accident. We don't want to continue to see across-the-board cuts being mandated. It would be good to actually implement the proposal for differentiated targets, and maybe you can do something about that over the summer so that in the actual budget cycle we know that perhaps one or two of the large budget areas will not continue to increase, and that money can be available for housing and transit and the other services. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenberg. Any questions for Mr. Rosenberg? Councillor Shiner?
Michael?
Yes.
I'm over here. David Shiner, how are you?
Yeah.
So you were talking about need for new revenues and more spending on transit and housing. Transit and housing are probably our largest areas of concern. Is that something you think should be mostly based upon city getting new revenues for that, or because you're saying cut city services or look at what we do for transit and housing, which I'm wondering if you think that the federal and provincial governments should be on board and how much for that?
What I'm saying is that, and this would apply to the other governments as well, is that they need to establish some sort of direction and understanding that, like, what I might call internal services, like technology, are not actually what the public is demanding. And so even if the money were to come from the other governments, obviously with the economy not growing and, in fact, shrinking on a per capita basis, they would have to make the same decision. So what I'm really saying is redirect money from things that are not as essential to the frontline public towards the things that are. And if that happens at the other levels of government and we benefit from that, that's fine. But my message is how to get there, not who's going to do it. Everybody should be doing it.
But the shortfall, and I don't mean to belabor this, the shortfall in the other levels of government is huge. It's over $20 billion needs for housing and close to, for TTC, and then we've got huge amount for housing. Information technology expenses can't come anywhere close to that.
Well,
so the question is, are you think it's something that the city itself should be dealing with, or is this something that should very much be a shared funding issue?
It should be, but I mean, I'm willing to see higher taxes, but only if the information technology and police and others budgets are kept under control. And if you look at those budgets, like for example, over the period of the time that, for example, the Scarborough subway funding is considered to be of 30 years, the information technology spending over that time is double the amount of the Scarborough subway cost. And obviously the police budgets are very large also. So, I mean, those are factors. We have to rebalance our direction. We can't just continue to only look at new funding, new taxes, and then see it all eaten up in the IT and police budgets. We have to do both.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for Mr. Rosenberg? All right. Well, thank you very much. Sean Mahar, Executive Director of Social Planning, Toronto. Next. Okay. Adina Lebeau, Chair, Canadian Association of Retired People, CARP. Good morning. Thank you for coming. 5 minutes.
Thank you very much for having me. My name is Adina Lebeau. I'm the chair of CARP Toronto. And on behalf of our 90,000 Toronto members, I'm here to say that we're very concerned by some of the recommendations as outlined in the city's long-term fiscal report. While the body of the report is very clear that we're at a turning point and that the city must find new revenue sources to fund badly needed infrastructure and social services like transit, housing, and health, the recommendations don't address these needs. And in fact, some are actually in conflict with the analysis in the report. We are spending less, the report says, per capita now than 6 years ago, and our population is growing. The challenge is very clear. Toronto has a revenue problem that needs to be addressed in short order. And we must study and use the revenue tools we have on hand to finance the needs of a city the size of Toronto. The CCPA did a revenue tool report showing that Toronto leaves approximately $500 million a year on the table by not using the revenue-generating tools and the powers granted to council under law. And Sheila Block will be on shortly to talk more about that. But the city must also study and create more progressive tax tools like road tolls, hotel taxes, sales taxes. Other cities have already created and implemented such tools. We need to study them. Just think of how much more housing, healthcare, and other social programs of all kinds we can fund with that kind of money in the kitty. While the long-term report says that short-term fixes are unhelpful and unsustainable, it recommends exploring short-term fixes, asset sales, selling off, contracting out. While putting quick money into the government coffers, it will just lead to higher costs for consumers and less access long-term to the services as the price of privatization rises. Why would we want to do this? While the report makes clear that City Hall has cut all it can without hurting services that people rely on, it recommends that divisions and agencies continue to cut their budgets by pursuing cost reductions, and also suggests that the city scale back on planned investments. This is not the right way to go. We need to set out our housing, social service program, and TTC priorities and use our revenue-generating tools to meet that budgeted need. We don't have a choice anymore, and it's now that this must be done. An aging population is going to increase the demand and double the demand for these kinds of services over the next 10 to 15 years, and we must be ready. In a recent CARP survey, just to end, members voted that they are in favor of giving a little more, higher taxes, so that social reform can be undertaken and financed. And I'm sure that many other Torontonians feel the same way. Taxes are not a bad thing, and world-class cities don't stay world-class cities very long without them. Just to end, CARP did another member survey that ranked the top 10 cities in Canada on the basis of access and supply of low-cost housing, access to health care and home care, access to healthy food supplies, and access to transportation. And the winners are Peterborough, Winnipeg, Montreal, and Victoria. The worst, Calgary and Kelowna, and Toronto is also near the bottom of the list. It's shameful and unconscionable that Canada's largest city ranks so low. As Canada's largest city, we must be a role model and we must be leading the pack. We must do better. New York brought itself back from the brink of bankruptcy by using its revenue tools, and we ask Council to do the same on behalf of Toronto and Torontonians. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Are there questions of this deputy? Might I just ask you a couple then, if there aren't others? You sort of basically in your presentation, I don't want to put words in your mouth, ruled out the monetization of assets, and you spoke in favor of service enhancement, especially in response to an aging population, which makes sense in light of your, who you represent here today. And then you talked a lot about so-called revenue tools. Can I just ask, there was a column, for example, out in the newspaper this weekend saying, well, what we should do is increase property taxes by 5% every year plus inflation. Would CARP and your membership, based on your surveys, support that?
Well, property taxes are lower. I think you'll see in Sheila Block's presentation, our property taxes are the lowest of 10 or 12 different cities. Our people, we need the services. We need the services for a growing population. There's growing need. And then there is a doubling of the aging population. Our membership and our surveys have said, yes, people are willing to pay a little more in order to finance this long term. We can't keep doing what we've always done with the imploding need for these services and social programs. And, what we're also looking at is there are major cities across North America who have taken steps in this direction, and I'm sure city staff can take a look at the research and take a look at what's going on in other cities and put together a plan for Toronto and look at it, different department, need by need, like Michael Rosenberg was saying. Some are going to need more, some are going to need less, may differ than what happened in the past, but then budget accordingly and use your revenue tools to meet those needs. We want a quality of life for our children and our grandchildren. This is just not the seniors. This is age-friendly. Our children and our grandchildren as are important as we are, and we want everybody to have the quality of life in Canada's major city, and we want it to be a role model. We want it to be the leader, not down at the bottom of the barrel.
All right, so CARP is willing then to entertain a 5%. Our biggest revenue tool, of course, is property taxes. Could I just ask you to name what your other top two would be from CARP?
Well, TTC, housing.
No, the other top two revenue enhancement measures, just so we know, because you talked a lot about that. Which would be the ones you'd choose first if you were sitting here in our position having to raise this money you suggest is needed?
Well, there was the one tax was taken away, the motor vehicle registration tax was taken away, but the system is still in place, and it was going to produce $50 or $75 million. That's one way to do it. You can take a look at the progressive taxes outlined in the CCPA to do it. I know because I read the report. I don't know that these are CARP's priority choices of taxes, but there was a parking tax as part of it. There were the property taxes as part of it. There were health taxes. There was a liquor tax, and it goes against our health priorities. We are going to be paying more money for health care, and I guess tobacco, liquor, those kinds of overindulgences are going against our long-term health concerns, and we can use that to put money in the coffers to at least pay for the concerns. We have set out policies, we have set out strategies, and all of our actions have to conform to doing that. So, if it brings us more money to do it, then let's do it.
Okay, thanks very much. Deputy Mayor Ramon?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on some of the mayor's questions. So, Mayor, I've got a lot of seniors in my ward who are on fixed incomes, and they complain to me when we raise taxes 1.5% because they're not making any extra money and they're having trouble making ends meet. So, if we raise taxes by 5%, where do you propose they get that extra money?
Well, I don't know what taxes you're
If we raise property
talking.
taxes by 5%, where do you propose all these seniors that are on fixed incomes get that extra money from? What part of their budget should they cut? Where will they get that money?
We have a lot of seniors that are brick rich, which means they have a lot of money in their capital. What will happen when you have more housing options in your housing kitty is people will have alternatives to staying in a large home with 4 or 5 bedrooms, one person, trying to maintain property taxes, trying to maintain the repairs. Right now, we don't have the social housing options to help people make new 21st century choices about where they go next. Many people are going, well, if I leave my home, then what do I do? If we have money in the kitty and we have different housing options in different communities, they will have a place to go on their fixed incomes.
So, Mr. Mayor, if what I'm taking from the deputy and what she's saying is that these seniors are brick rich, which means I take it from the answer to my question that she says that she is suggesting, the deputy is suggesting, that they get that tax money by selling their homes, which would make a lot of residents a lot of seniors very, very angry because they would like to stay in their homes.
Well, you also have the property tax relief program that you already have for other seniors. We need housing options, sir. We need housing options to give people choices. What we're saying now is we don't have the choices. You do have the property tax relief fund for those people. Other cities are trying different alternatives, shared housing programs like Brampton, where you've been in your family home for 30 years, you've got 5 bedrooms, bring in 3 of your friends or 3 people to share, hire social workers. We're going back. We have to think of new and creative solutions to house a population. We want people to have a quality of life. We know many people that if there were other solutions to them staying in a big house with all the pressures that are on them for repairs and taxes and things going up, they would take it. It's all they know right now, and we don't have a lot of options out there when you take a look at affordable housing or low-income housing, and they don't have the computer access to City Hall and your program. I mean, there's lots of things that we can do better. One of them is just the arrange and supply of different kinds of housing arrangements for the next 10 to 15 years.
So just to be clear, your other creative ideas for these seniors who've been living in their houses, who live all across the city, is to invite other people into their homes where they have extra bedrooms to share their housing.
I'm saying that there are different options you need to explore. What I'm saying is other communities who are further ahead than Toronto have home share programs that have been piloted. All I'm suggesting is that we have staff people. Let's look at some of the really good ideas that other cities and other parts of Ontario are looking at, researching them. I don't have the answers, but other people, this isn't rocket science, other people have started looking because they're taking proactive actions to some of the problems and challenges and issues that have been facing them. So just look at them and research them and maybe come up with your own creative ideas. We've put you in power. Be creative. There's population, a growing population that really does need creative choices. And nobody wants people living on fixed income, stranded by an asset that they're burdened with. You want them in their older years to have a good life. And an easier life. And it's up to us to give them and provide the solutions and the options for them to choose.
All right, thank you, Deputy Mayor Renan Wong. Councillor Palacio.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Ms. Levo. And this is a follow-up to Deputy Mayor Denzel Minnie-Wang's questioning. You did mention that the property tax increase cancellation program or the water rate rebate program or the Toronto Renovates program assists senior citizens. That's what you mentioned. Is that correct?
These are good programs, yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Are you aware that for a senior citizen, a homeowner, to qualify for these programs, the maximum income is $38,000 per year, and also the assessment value or the market value of the property cannot be more than $750,000. Mm-hmm. Are you aware about that?
You know what? I hear what you're saying. I don't know the ins and the outs of the laws and the programs. All I'm asking you is to ask staff to take a look at what other jurisdictions and other cities are doing with respect to access to low-income housing and finding creative solutions for people, okay, to remain in their homes, to stay in their homes, to sell their homes, have places to go. Sir, I'm 66 years old, so I'm not 88 or 90. My friends who have homes and whose children are out of the house right now are taking in foreign language students to fill the 3 or 4 bedrooms because they too need money. But that requires a managerial ability to start a small business. That kind of thing is happening now. When you're older, it could be a number of people living together, sharing common space, having a social worker, and meals brought in to help you. These are some of the programs.
I do get it. Thank you.
Okay.
But are you also aware that the majority of seniors that we have out there are struggling to survive with meager pensions that they have?
Yes.
And to add additional financial pressures in terms of additional property tax increases, that would be forcing them to be on food banks, literally speaking.
No, not if they have options. Our problem is you have people in untenable situations sitting in their homes because there's no options and no places for them to go. For instance, I sell my home, I have to go live somewhere. Where am I going to live? A condo. We don't have the options and we don't have the alternatives right now because we haven't done the research. We haven't done the work. We haven't looked around, and we don't have the options and the alternatives to give people so that they can liquidate, they can sell, or they can stay. They can find different living arrangements to bring some money in and to reduce their reliance to have a little more spendable income. That's all I'm saying. A lot of people are being held captive now. It's true. We know it. I hear it all the time. But people are going, Dina, what's my option? What are the options? What are the alternatives? And what I would ask you guys to do is look at some of the alternatives. Great pilot projects happening all across North America. Look at them. The home share, I just got one that came across my desk the other day from Brampton, the Brampton Home Share Program and Agreement, and they've been taking them from 3 other places in Canada, but not Toronto. We're not doing the research. We're not on the leading edge.
My last question, are you aware that City of Toronto is the leading city in terms of having all these programs to assist the seniors so they'll be able to stay home and to survive, especially given the meager incomes that they have. And to add more financial pressure to them, it would be a suicidal move. That I don't think that there is much appetite in City Council.
We don't want to add financial pressure for them. We want them to have a good quality of life. We want to take the financial pressure off. And maintaining in your 80s or 90s a huge 5-bedroom house is a financial pressure that no senior citizen really needs unless they choose to do.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Palazzo. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Ms. Lebo, sales tax, are you supportive of that?
Progressive, there are progressive...
One for the city specifically. Sales tax specifically for the city.
Well, other cities are using the... it's up to... Look, we need the money. We just heard from the city manager using...
Ma'am, I'm asking you whether or not you support that. I understand about the reports. I understand the information from the city manager and so on, but I just want to understand...
I'm not familiar about the sales tax in front of the city. What I do know is other cities have implemented sales taxes. If they're progressive sales taxes that don't hurt the most vulnerable, then the cities have gone forth. Again, city staff has to do the research.
Hotel tax?
These are taxes other cities have put into place for tourists coming into the city. And they have put money in the coffers for roads and transportation.
Well, I'm trying to understand, but has your association actually spoken about any of these types of revenue tools specifically?
Not specifically.
Okay,
we know we are looking at the revenue tools, and we are looking at revenue tools, as an option.
Right.
You can only cut so much. And in the last 6 years, we've gone down per capita at a time when we should be getting ready, for another large population.
So when you responded with respect to the question to the deputy mayor as it related to, I think the point you were making was that seniors should be able to supplement their income. Is that what you talked about in terms of being able to rent out rooms and so on? Was that what you were trying to intimate?
No, what we were talking about is many seniors live on fixed incomes. And with inflation going up, they feel financially squeezed.
Right.
And they are put in positions where they either eat or go to the doctor. The TTC is a very high price ticket. Some people don't fill their prescriptions. This is not the quality of life that we want in this city, where people say, I can't take my medicine, can't go to the doctor, because it's a question of using the TTC
so what I was trying
or going to the doctor.
What I was trying to understand from you, ma'am, is that when you made reference to the rooms, it seemed to me you were suggesting that there's an opportunity for seniors to be able to generate revenues through rental of rooms in their homes. Is that what you were saying?
There are all kinds of opportunities. That's one of them. There are experiments in housing going on. All I'm asking is that Toronto City Council and staff look at some of these experiments.
Right.
It could be eye-opening, and it could alleviate.
So are you suggesting then that we would direct residents to then, obviously as a course of business, be able to rent out rooms in order to generate revenue?
There are housing...
Sorry, ma'am, may I just finish my line of questioning? So to rent out rooms and then be able to pay taxes? It's not clear to me what you're saying.
There are housing registries that have been created focusing on a senior population. finding roommates or housemates. Social isolation is a health deterrent in seniors. Keeping people engaged, keeping people healthy is very necessary as we age, and being alone and isolated in a home under severe financial pressure is not the way to go. So absolutely, housing alternatives of all kinds will bring relief to people.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Thompson. Any other questions? All right, well then, thank you very much for your representations, and appreciate that. We'll go back to Sean Mahar, because I think he was just stepped out for a minute when his turn came up, and hear from him now. You've been here many times, sir, in 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. My apologies. I'm doing double duty here at City Hall today, and I appreciate the indulgence of being brought back onto the list. And I want to compliment Council, and in particular staff, for the incredibly astute analysis that has gone into this report. This is, in our view, a better insight into the fiscal circumstances of the city than we've seen in a very long time. And it faces some really critical challenges and some very unpopular facts. It names the inescapable fact that spending has been quite constrained over the last 6 years. In fact, costs have declined when adjusted for inflation and population growth. And property tax revenues in particular have actually decreased by almost 5% since 2010 when adjusted for inflation. And while that reliance on property tax has decreased, user fees have risen sharply. In particular, fees on the lowest income families, fees like TTC fares and recreation fees, fees that affect large families like water use and garbage taxes, have risen sharply. We have, this evidence tells us, spent years lowering the costs for the most affluent while raising costs for the lowest income families in our city. That is hardly a sustainable or an equitable strategy. The report notes that we have avoided facing the worst implications of this unsustainable strategy, these falling tax rates and growing demands, by adopting a revenue tool, the land transfer tax, and by shuffling the duck chairs as fast as we can. And it tells us we have reached the absolute limit of those two strategies. The report is clear that we have reached the practical limit of cutting and trimming and rationalizing in community services. It's clear that efficiencies will not save us from our current fiscal circumstances. Our fiscal health will, without any doubt, depend on finding the revenues to deliver on our commitments to the public. If we don't address our fiscal health now, we will, the staff report says clearly, face deepening shortages in childcare and housing. We won't be able to afford a poverty reduction strategy or reliable transit. I want to quote the staff on the implications of these shortages. Quote, "Operating expenses are not simply government spending for its own sake. They are investments in vital public resources by Council towards a broader public good. We cannot meet those goals without the revenues to pay for them." And let's be clear, those shortages are not evenly distributed. There is far more poverty in the inner suburbs in this city, and there are fewer services there. And the lack of investment means that they will not catch up in the inner suburbs to where services are downtown. When we decline to invest, what we are doing is failing those inner suburban communities in particular. And the report is clear about where the solution is found and where it is not found. And I quote again, "The intention is explicitly not to set off a sense of immediate urgency, expense slashing, or a revenue grab. Short-term revenues like asset sales or unsustainable cuts also cannot solve this problem." The report underscores the need to sustain our commitments to key goals like equitable access and quality jobs. We shouldn't see facing the fiscal facts as a reason to pretend away our key municipal goals. We need revenue tools that are sustainable, reliable, and as much as possible equitable. We have to take on the task as a city and as a council of bringing in those revenues, or we have to face the public and admit we are no longer trying to build the kind of city we originally planned. We must do one or the other. And this is a big question. It's one that the report notes requires a real dialogue with the public if we want to make real choices that affect community priorities. I look forward to working with the city and city council to engage those communities in that critical conversation, because it will fundamentally affect the kind of city we build and whether or not we really build a city that's there for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mahar. Questions of Mr. Mahar? Councillor DeGiorgio.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In your comments with respect to generating new revenue tools, you indicated that in the past there's been a movement away from, let's say, attaching increases to property taxes and introducing user fees and what have you.
Yep.
You know, the municipal land transfer tax is also a targeted tax. It is a property tax, but it's targeted not to the broader population, but rather specific groups. So when we look at new revenue tools going forward, is it your view that the new revenue tools should be very broadly based as opposed to target groups?
I think we want to make sure that they are as progressive as possible. Different sources of revenue have different levels of progressivity. There's not sort of one progressive tax and one regressive tax. They're across a spectrum. What we have right now is a system in place that is very, very regressive. We are lowering taxes on the most affluent, on people who can afford houses and cars, and we are raising taxes on the least affluent, people who have to use transit and use public services. So we should be trying as much as possible to find...
consider the municipal land transfer tax to be progressive?
It is comparatively progressive relative to the current system, the current other options. The land transfer tax has the virtue of charging more for people who buy more expensive homes. People who are buying more expensive things tend to be more affluent, so that kind of tax will tend to be more progressive.
Thank you.
Other questions of Mr. Mahar? All right, then, on that note, we'll thank you very much for being with us today and move to our next deputy, John Cartwright, Toronto and York Region Labour Council. Mr. Cartwright, you're familiar with the rules. You have 5 minutes, and thank you for coming.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, councillors. The Labour Council has long been an advocate of healthy finances for this city, and particularly when the province of Ontario downloaded immense costs on the city. We've been lobbying for the last 2 decades for Toronto Community Housing to have more money coming back from the province, and in fact have partnered with a number of civil society organizations to support the RESET program, asking the federal government for money for TCHC, and also have been relentlessly pushing the province of Ontario to come back to the previous fiscal arrangement of covering half of the operating subsidy of the Toronto Transit Commission. This report, I think, is a very useful report because it identifies reality and the real fiscal crunch that has come as a result of a number of decisions made in the last few years. We supported the City of Toronto Act because it allowed the city to have more revenue tools than simply property tax. And property tax by itself is not progressive. Well, Councillor DeGiorgio just mentioned the land transfer tax. In fact, if the city did not have that land transfer tax, which came through a very narrow vote, there would be a disaster today on the cost of property tax of homeowners, particularly those on fixed income. And so we need other revenue streams. We have a view on the user fees that says basically, for a number of them, they are regressive. However, on the plus side, those user fees for water and for solid waste, in fact, represent an environmental trade-off that is essential for the future of the city. We do not agree with TTC increases, or fares being increased in the future. We think they're already too high for many low-income families. But I want to spend most of my time talking about an area that the report touches on, and that is don't have a short-term fire sale of key assets in order to try and fix a long-term revenue program. The Toronto Hydro raises over $60 million for this city every year, and that will be increased dramatically when we look at the province of Ontario's plans to dramatically shift away from fossil fuels towards clean electricity. We know that Toronto Hydro is set to play a much bigger role, and that the consumers and homeowners and residents, including tenants, will be involving electricity much more than they currently are. So we need to keep that $60 million and growing in public hands. Likewise, with the Toronto Parking Authority, $44 million in profits and $19 million in taxes. Again, a goose that lays a golden egg every single year for the people of Toronto. Now, there's some lobbyists and wealthy interests who would love to get their hands on that goose in order that they collect the gold every year rather than the people. And we'd want to ensure that this study takes those things off the table, because if you include those in the table, you'll distort the potential outcome. We also understand that the federal government, in announcing its federal infrastructure program, has said there'll be money for transit, for green infrastructure, and for social infrastructure. And we'd want to make sure that the study that you're undertaking looks at a life cycle analysis of investment in capital. And that is, you look at sometimes the very minimal cost increase of a building or an operation that will bring you back many times over cost savings on the operation. And we've seen that, having to go back time and again doing energy retrofits in buildings, where if we'd done it right the first time, we would have saved millions of dollars as well as reduced GHG tremendously. And so I'm really struck by the city manager's last comments. We need revenue tools that are recurrent and stable. And those are the kinds of things that, as you move forward, need to be examined. And we would say very, very clearly that selling off Toronto Hydro does not fit in that category. Selling off Toronto Parking Authority does not fit in that category. Those should be off the table. We should look at a number of streams that add to the future fiscal health of this city, and do so with a clear understanding that climate change is going to bring far more extreme weather events, which will put even more pressure on the budget of the city, and also the partnering with senior levels of government around adaptation and mitigation for climate change means there's many opportunities to invest money and have much more return around life cycle costs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. Obviously, well practiced. 4:55. That's very good. Any questions of Mr. Cartwright this morning? All right. Well, hearing none, we will. Thank you very much for being here. Sheila Block, Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, Ontario office. Ms. Block, welcome. 5 minutes.
Good morning, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you about this report. On the face of it, it might appear a little bit dry and a little bit long, but it provides you as decision makers with information that's really crucial to the future of our city. And while I don't agree with all of its proposals, I really want to commend the staff who prepared it. It provides you with the fiscal context for the remainder of this term and beyond. It explains how we got here. It provides projections of where the city's finances will be if you do not take additional action. And it provides you, very importantly, with tools and resources to support the decisions that you're going to need to make. And it also provided you with this information with enough lead time to take action on it for the 2017 budget. So the report takes you through the city finances over the last 6 years, and it describes the slow growth in revenue and in expenditures that you've seen over the last 6 years. And some of you might think that this slow growth in expenditures was actually a good thing. In fact, many of you on this committee might think so. But whether you think it was a good thing or whether you think it was a bad thing, it cannot continue as it has, and that's what the report makes very clear. Savings from cost-shared programs will now go to the province because of uploading, and spending that has been delayed has increased costs for 2017 and beyond. The report then turns to revenues, and it describes the slow growth in your core revenue source, which is property taxes. And a number that kind of leapt out at me was the nominal growth in property taxes over the last 6 years was 14%, compared to the 39% for rate-based revenues. And these rate-based revenues are not small change. They're equal to about 40% of property tax revenue, or $1.7 billion. The final piece of this revenue picture, of course, has been the increased reliance on the land transfer tax. So this combination of circumstances on both the spending and the revenue side, falling shared costs, delayed spending, and maturing of the land transfer tax revenues, was unique and will not continue. So the report then turns to the revenue projections for the next 5 years. It shows opening pressures at about $500 million for 2017, and it shows that these can come down to a very manageable $93 million if action's taken. But if those pressures aren't addressed, it will rise to $1 billion. So where does this leave you? And I think it really leaves you in a space where you will no longer be able to have slow growth in revenues and, at the same time, maintain and enhance services. And so you'll have to make choices. They won't be easy, but these are the choices that you've been elected to make. If you believe that maintaining low property tax increases is of paramount importance, then you'll have to decide which services to cut. And there will be a public debate about that decision. If you decide that services need to be maintained and expanded, you will have to increase existing taxes or introduce new ones or increase user fees or sell off public assets or a combination of all of these factors. And there will also be a public debate about those decisions. The arithmetic has been laid out for you very clearly. However, it also offers you in this report help and guidance in whichever of these paths you choose. It starts out by providing mechanisms to improve your expense management processes, and these will be important to you whether you go down either of these two paths. Ensuring that public dollars are spent wisely is important for a number of reasons, including maintaining residents' faith in government and in public services. The report also outlines the limitations of cost reductions and the mixed successes that governments have in attempting them. And it goes on to tell you about the resources that staff will be providing to support your decisions on revenues, including asset reviews, the development of the City Building Fund, and the Revenue Options Report. The time has come, Mr. Mayor, for you and all City Councillors to act on these recommendations. The time for magical thinking about the City's finances is over. There are no more rabbits to pull out of the hat. Toronto's residents are counting on you to have an adult conversation about taxes and services and to make the right decisions to ensure public health and safety, as well as to ensure that Toronto continues to thrive in the future. Thank you.
Well, to be fair, just as adept as Mr. Cartwright, 4 minutes and 58 seconds. Thank you very much, Ms. Block. Are there questions of Ms. Block this morning? All right. Thank you very much for...
Thanks a lot.
Oh, I'm sorry. Where's... there's Councillor... Sorry, I didn't see there. Deputy Member McConnell?
Simple request of the deputant. I think that was very knowledgeable, and I would like to have it submitted and distributed. Thank you.
The deputation?
Yes, please.
Yes. All right. We can certainly arrange that. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Block. Okay. That brings us to John Camilleri, President, Canadian Union of Public Employees, Local 1, Toronto Hydro. Welcome, Mr. Camilleri. You too know the rules. 5 minutes, and we welcome you.
I do. Thank you very much for having me this morning. My name is John Camilleri. I'm the president of CUPE Local 1, representing 950 Toronto Hydro employees. I live in Toronto. I was born and raised in Toronto, along with my family. Again, the city is embarking on a process to determine the long-term vision of the city finances. Parts of that discussion have included levels of taxation, new revenue tools, and the potential sale of assets. This committee will be one of the important forums that will hear from people on how to shape the fiscal stability of the city for years to come. Budgets are about choices and how to distribute and share our resources for the well-being of residents and businesses alike. The city has some important resources, and perhaps none more critical than the electrical utility of Toronto Hydro. This was certainly underscored in the emergency situations of the ice storms in 2013. Aside from making the city finances worse, selling such a valuable asset has proved to be increasingly unpopular in communities across the province, as residents are resisting selling any of their utilities. The sale of Toronto Hydro is not a new idea. Previous administrations have considered it. It was discussed in the election of 2014, and recently the option has been raised again for discussion along with long-term financial plan. We understand that the city has challenges, but you cannot solve revenue problems by selling off critical assets, losing both income and control. This will only make it less painful for a short period of time. I have come here to say that clearly that selling any portion of Toronto Hydro as part of this plan would be a mistake, and the city has options, other options. The evidence shows that public utilities across the province perform better, are cheaper for users, and provide much-needed income for municipalities. Comparing Ontario's publicly and privately owned utilities in terms of total cost per customer, fully public companies average $409 per year compared to fully private companies that are at $725 per year. Costs specific to OM&A show that public utilities are run less expensively and fully and partially privatized utilities. The local comparison demonstrates that there is absolutely no evidence privatization will lower costs. Public also means quality of service. In measurements of quality of service, privately owned utilities fared worse than 100% of publicly owned electrical utilities in this province. Standardized measurements of service for utilities, we call it SAIDI, which would be the System Average Interruption Duration Index, show public utilities in Ontario are more reliable and get the power back on sooner after a blackout. QP Local 1 has begun to look at just how valuable our utility is to the city. What the preliminary analysis is showing is that over the last 10 years, the utility has proved to be an exceptional investment with an average rate of return of 10%. The shareholder direction from the city to the corporation requires Toronto Hydro to pay a dividend to the city each year equal to 1, $25 million, or 2, 50% of the prior year's income. In 2015, that total dividend was more than $56 million. A majority of residents across the province have voted against the sale of any hydro. 3/4 of residents believe electricity should remain in public hands. Moreover, a strong majority think there should be no sale of any kind. And finally, there is a concern prices will go up and revenues going down. Just to finish off, as the city manager said on a few occasions, just to keep the lights on. Well, if you sell Toronto Hydro, that cost will be going up. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We had a question from Councillor Perks.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm sorry, could you just tell me a little bit more about this SAIDI thing, comparing public and private reliability?
When we look at the our interruptions,
yeah,
if there's outages, so every public utility in Ontario has a better average than any private utility in Ontario.
For the length of and frequency
the duration and getting the lights back on sooner.
Getting them back on sooner. Is there a source I can get to for that information?
Yeah, we can get you that.
Please?
Absolutely.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Thanks, Councillor Perks. Councillor Davis.
Just wondered, thank you very much, John. In 2015, the dividend to the city was $56 million. Could you tell us more about what the average dividend has been annually, or the total amount over the last decade? Or
according to the records, it was $499.5 million since 2006.
$500 million since 2006?
That's correct.
And there has been a suggestion that there will be increased reliance on electricity in our power future in Ontario. Do you see that, and is Toronto Hydro planning for that?
Well, yeah, Toronto Hydro is in a major rebuild. the infrastructure. They've just got a 5-year OEB rate decision.
Right.
It brings us into the end of 2019. And roughly, I think their capital spend will be, I don't know, $400 million a year over the next 5 years. So they're building for the future. And, you know, you look at the skyline of Toronto, there's roughly, I don't know, 150 or 200 cranes in the air. So wherever you look, our infrastructure is being rebuilt, and we're getting a lot more, there are a lot more customers in Toronto.
So as the demand for hydro increases, our dividend obviously will continue to increase quite significantly.
I would suggest that would be true.
Okay. And I think that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Davis. Any other questions of Mr. Camilleri? All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. And that would bring us next to Helen Armstrong, a Community Development and Social Action Worker, St. Stephen's Community House. Good morning. Thank you for coming. You have 5 minutes.
Good morning. St. Stephen's Community House welcomes the City discussion on long-term fiscal needs. However, we are concerned that the new staff report does not go further in calling for new revenue tools. We urge the City to move in the 2017 budget process to put new revenue tools in place. We must not lose sight of the human cost of inaction and frozen budgets on people's lives. We work with vulnerable people in the downtown Southwest, and they can't continue to have their needs unmet and unfunded. They can't afford some types of user fees, which this report recommends. We also disagree with the report's recommendation that the City sell assets, as other speakers have discussed. In particular, we take issue with ongoing council decisions to allow escalating TTC fares, while property tax hikes have not kept up. Underfunding of social housing and support is also a serious issue for our homeless populations. We've watched as our participants sink deeper into poverty over the past decade. And some of our participants have spoken up consistently at the City Committee level. They are asking for secure, safe, affordable housing, affordable transit fares, healthy food, and adequate shelter space in the downtown core. The City needs to make a big shift. We look to you to introduce a diverse set of new revenue tools and to fund reduced transit fares for low-income people, affordable housing, and the poverty reduction strategy that was put in place. And we want you to do this for 2017 and beyond. We have spoken up for a robust poverty reduction strategy, joining with other organizations in the Social Planning Toronto Commitment to Community campaign. I will quote a couple of our participants who've spoken up in the past year. One of our senior services members, Mary Tan, stated, quote, "I ask you to put in place new taxes, such as an alcohol tax and road toll on the Gardiner Expressway. These are some of the recommendations mentioned in a new study by Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives," end quote. One of our homeless participants, Derek George, spoke out to this committee in June 2015. He stated, quote, "I've been evicted 5 times in the last year and a half. I've lost more than $3,000 in rent. I've been on the TCHC list for 6 years and haven't received one phone call to look at public housing. I've been stuck in rooming houses, ended up in a shelter or sleeping in the park because all the shelters are full," end quote. St. Stephen's sees the fraying social safety net and looks on with alarm at more calls for program efficiencies at the city level. However, we've seen little effort to contain the costs in the police budget, a budget which really must look for efficiencies. The city has a revenue problem, not a spending problem in most areas. Further program efficiencies can't be achieved without even more cuts to valuable services and infrastructure. Your committee has the power to recommend a robust discussion of new progressive and sustainable revenue tools to fund city services and other priorities. We agree with a new report by the Wellesley Institute, which calls for a $1 per day commercial parking tax to raise $640 million per year for the City of Toronto. And they note that this could make up the city's shelter support and housing budget for a year. When we invest in people, the returns will be significant. Poverty reduction strategies positively impact all residents of Toronto by making our neighborhoods healthier and our communities safer and more sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions of Ms. Armstrong? Thank you very much for being here. Much appreciated. Scott Travers, President, Society of Energy Professionals. Good morning, Mr. Travers.
Good morning.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name's Scott Travers. I'm the president of the Society of Energy Professionals, Local 160 of the IFPTE. We represent 8,000 professional employees, primarily in the electricity sector, including the engineers at Toronto Hydro. We appreciate the need for City Council to manage the city's finances. There's much at stake: the sustainability of vital services to a large and complex population, and the ability of Toronto to fulfill a city-building agenda to ensure that it succeeds in a highly competitive global economy. But with respect, the scope of the proposed report is unnecessarily broad. I will focus my comments specifically on Toronto Hydro and the proposed asset review. Toronto Hydro ought not be part of this discussion. As the report says, it's important that the city's revenue sources are resilient and support predictable achievement of a balanced budget. That is what Toronto Hydro is and does, and any sale of the asset would not only be kicking the can down the road, it would exacerbate issues with sustainable financing. You know that, we know that, the public knows that. And for others, the facts are laid out in a report done by former TD Chief Economist Doug Peters for CUPE. It confirms Toronto Hydro's performance over the last decade: the 5% dividend yield, the 9.4% return on equity, and the several occasions Toronto Hydro has provided needed funds to the city. It also advises you about the income effect on the city if privatizing Toronto Hydro: an $8 million annual loss from the sale of only 10% of Toronto Hydro, and a $39 million loss from the sale of 49% of the company. These numbers add weight to a study that we commissioned on the economics of electricity distribution in Ontario by MPR Associates. That study suggested that on average, privately owned LDCs have higher costs and lower reliability than publicly owned ones. The report found that the average annual costs at public-owned local distribution companies were $409 per customer, while costs at privately controlled utilities were nearly twice as high at $725 per customer. It's really no wonder that over 60% of Toronto voters would vote for a different councillor if Toronto Hydro was privatized. So I'm deeply troubled that the privatization of Toronto Hydro is part of your consideration. More troubling to me is that it appears that this is not a consideration of a hypothetical nature, but something far more real, something already somewhat in process. My members who serve this city well, who perform vital engineering functions for Toronto Hydro, ensuring the reliability of power to citizens and businesses alike, are facing a privatization agenda at the bargaining table. What stands between us and a new collective agreement is Toronto Hydro's insistence that our members lose parental leave benefits and that our members forsake the next generation of workers by giving away post-retirement benefits. In what can only be seen as a strategy to facilitate the sale of Toronto Hydro to private interests, management seems committed to an approach that would turn back the clock to a time when workers struggled for the right to start a family without worrying about losing their job or their income, and when workers had to worry about income security and dignity in retirement. I want to assure this committee the Society will not accept these cuts to important benefits in order to facilitate the sale of Toronto Hydro to private interests. Certainly, as the report says, it's no longer appropriate to kick the can down the road, but a sale of Toronto Hydro will do just that. exacerbating the city's financial issues while raising electricity prices for consumers. We urge you not to complicate an already difficult conversation by proceeding down the road of privatizing Toronto Hydro and turning a resilient, predictable, and provident source of revenue into a loss for this city. Please take the privatization of Toronto Hydro off the table. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Travers. Questions of Mr. Travers? All right, seeing none, I'll thank you very much for being here, and we'll move along. Michael Polanyi, commitment to community.
Good morning.
Hello. You welcome. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Michael Polanyi. I'm a community worker at the Children's Aid Society of Toronto, but I'm here today representing Commitment to Community. Commitment to Community is a broad coalition made up of faith communities, labor and business-linked groups, social service agencies, and residents living in poverty. We advocate for affordable city services and supports for residents. Our focus over the past year has been encouraging the city to develop a comprehensive poverty reduction strategy. We're concerned that Toronto has the highest level of both adult and child poverty among Canadian cities. Almost 1 in 3 children in Toronto lives on a low income. We were thrilled when Council unanimously adopted the poverty reduction strategy for the city in November. However, we were disappointed in February when Council failed to approve the needed investment to move ahead with the strategy. As a result, tens of thousands of people in our city remain without access to affordable housing, food, transit, childcare, and recreation programs. For years now, stopgap budgeting has hurt the most vulnerable by allowing transit fares to rise above the cost of inflation, by allowing a shift in tax burden towards more regressive user fees, by failing to adequately fund affordable housing, shelters, childcare, and recreation programs. We're therefore pleased that Council is moving ahead with discussions about how to put the city on a solid long-term financial footing so that Council can fulfill its commitments to the people of the city, including the implementation of the Poverty Reduction Plan. The city's long-term fiscal report is clear about a few things. The city faces a large operating and capital funding gap. In many areas, spending has already been constrained. The limits of efficiencies in most areas of the budget have been reached. Indeed, as we've heard, understaffing and gapping have reduced services and effectiveness in a number of departments. And finally, the city has primarily a revenue problem, not a spending problem. That said, we are pleased that the report assumes a 0% increase in the police budget, which could free up tens of millions of dollars for badly needed services. Moving to a multi-year, strategic, sustainable, evidence-informed budget can be a big step forward if the city's financial strategy seriously takes into account the needs of the most vulnerable in our city. That means ensuring there are adequate funds in the fiscal plan for Council to follow through on its commitments in the poverty reduction strategy, such as increasing the supply of affordable housing, supportive housing, and subsidized childcare, and developing a geared-to-income TTC fare. To fund these initiatives, Council will need to move ahead this term with the implementation of new revenue tools. It's crucial that the impact of revenue tools and spending allocations on the poorest Torontonians be considered. Indeed, Action 17.1 of the city's poverty reduction strategy commits to, quote, embed mechanisms that assess the impact of budget choices on poverty reduction in City Council's decision-making processes. Finally, the financial direction leaves open the question of whether Council should continue to pursue a city-building agenda or adopt a, quote, more restrained vision. We feel now is not the time to step back from city building. Now is the time to develop a fiscal plan that supports Council's mission, which, as the city's website indicates, is to, quote, champion the economic, social, and environmental vitality of the city by providing high-quality and affordable services that respond to the needs of our communities. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Blaney. Are there questions of Mr. Blaney? Councillor McMahon. And Councillor Davis, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming in. Michael, so what would the commitment to communities' top 3 revenue tool choices be?
As I said in the presentation, our primary concern is that revenue tools do not impact on those who are do not impact primarily or disproportionately on those who are struggling the most. So we would be looking at that in terms of priorities. One possibility is a sales tax with a rebate for lower income families. I mean, I think the point is that it's already been made that the shift, and I said it too, the shift from property tax to user fees and transit fares is regressive and has hurt the most vulnerable. So while a property tax, some homeowners are facing challenges, a property tax is less increase, would be less regressive than continuing to see above inflation increases in transit. That's kind of how we would be looking at it, and we would hope the city would look at that too in terms of the progressivity or regressiveness of measures.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Davis.
Thank you very much. I do note in here that in the report that there are a couple of points where there's a list of criteria or things that we ought to look at in assessing savings, and in fact there's another place where we ought to be looking at a whole range of criteria, and one of them is compatibility with other city objectives, including living wage and equity goals. And there are, as I said, I know there are other places where these objectives are something that have to be considered when we look at our strategies going forward. Now, you asked about embedding the poverty reduction strategy or these social objectives in our processes. I see it in some places, and I'm wondering if you have any other suggestions for how we might embed our social objectives, social policy or other objectives, environmental and other policy objectives in this process, which isn't really clear at all, actually.
I would agree that, and I think our feeling is that the vision, the values, the type of city that you and we want to create is largely absent in this fiscal report, and that it's really important that a fiscal plan be a plan to achieve something, and that there are clearly stated objectives and priorities. I think in terms of ensuring that there's adequate funds for the poverty reduction strategy, I think that the report mentions the poverty reduction strategy a couple of times, and in the context of the question of whether the city should move towards a restrained approach or whether it should continue to commit to city building. And so I think we would want to see an explicit commitment to moving ahead with the implementation of the poverty reduction strategy. We would want to see a strong equity analysis in the report of revenue, the equity impacts of revenue tools and spending priorities, as I already talked about, and really an adequate funding level to move ahead with the implementation of the poverty reduction strategy. Last year, as you know, 50 organizations, including the Board of Trade, Civic Action, the United Way, said that last year, or in this year, really, to move ahead with the implementation of the poverty reduction strategy would require a $75 million investment. As you know, the city invested more in the order of about $10 million, depending on what you include in the basket. So there's really a significant there's a significant need for strong investment in housing and childcare and a low-income transit pass as well.
Over the last many years, we have spent a lot of time looking at how we could reduce expenses and protect existing service levels. And in fact, every budget since I've been here, I think, has been a budget that says no service enhancements. We've experienced growth in the city. We've experienced transitions in neighborhoods where we've seen deepening poverty and growing inequalities with no agenda, really, until recently, for addressing this growing polarization in our city. And I'm wondering if we ought to be looking at service levels from a needs perspective as opposed to looking at service levels from maintaining versus reducing.
Yeah, I mean, I would say definitely that's important. I know that one of the processes that staff are working on for the poverty reduction strategy is to come up with specific indicators, targets and indicators for progress. I think that's crucial, moving ahead with the strategy. I also think that the fact that I think it's about 21,000 families waiting for subsidized childcare, and in the order of 80,000 households waiting for subsidized housing, and the fact that we don't have specific targets for
service needs. So assessing
to address those needs and to reduce those waiting lists. We need a timeline to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor McConnell.
Thank you, and thank you, Michael. And we actually, as you know, don't agree on the investment. And I keep reminding you to look at the $11 billion budget, not the $7 million enhancement. But we'll work that through so that we all have a common understanding. What I wanted to just refer to, I think the councillor before me has made the very good analysis around the needs-based assessment. And there were some alternative revenues. You've spoken for sure about the need for a taxation increase, and as a big piece in terms of how it fits with poverty reduction. The other ones, the entertainment, alcohol, beverage, tobacco, is that one that you think is supportable? I'm just going to go through the list. I'd be interested.
I can't say that commitment to community at this point has come up with a prioritized
No, I was
list.
just asking what Michael thinks. I agree with you. I don't expect you to.
My understanding I haven't looked closely at the progressivity or the impacts on vulnerable groups of those specific taxes. I think that some concern about those is the level of revenue that would be brought in, and whether that would be sufficient to move ahead in terms of the needs of the city.
I was just sort of more looking at the basket. Were there any of these within the basket that you thought would be onerous on people living with life experience of poverty? The vehicle registration ownership was not, I don't think, a major one on poverty.
I mean, I think that there's been talk about the fact that generally the profile of people using the TTC is a lower income profile than vehicle owners, but by no means is that a universal thing. And so, I mean, one thing that I would encourage council to look at is to think creatively about some of these proposals in terms of ways to make them more progressive. So one thing I wondered why the vehicle registration tax is a flat tax of $60 per vehicle. Why not, make the first vehicle $30 and the second vehicle $90? The assumption being that families with two vehicles probably have more spending capacity. That's just an example of are there ways to be more creative. And I guess the other one that I would just put out there is we constantly hear the message that property taxes cannot be increased because there are a segment of homeowners who don't have a lot of money, and we totally acknowledge that there are a segment of homeowners. Well, why not look at and explore what many other jurisdictions do in Europe, in Ireland, of having a tiered property tax? So have a mill rate that's tiered. So there was just last week a study done by Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives in British Columbia, which said that if British Columbia brought in a progressive property tax, that means no tax increase for people living in homes of $1.25 million or less, but a small surtax on homes over $1.25 million. That could raise $1.7 billion a year for social housing. So I'm just encouraging council to think creatively about the various revenue.
Absolutely, very good point. The hotel tax and the road pricing, can you address those?
Again, the revenues are relatively small for those. I would point to, if you're looking for, I think already has been mentioned, if you're looking for a tax that's really going to have a significant revenue to really make a difference, then the parking levy obviously brings in much more revenue than either the road toll or the hotel tax.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the hotel tax, actually. I think it brings in quite a bit. But that was very helpful, and I think that that lens is not on here. And I think it's, if I could, don't you agree that it's a terribly important lens that we place on these taxations as we move towards implementation?
Yeah, I mean, fairness on page 36 of the report is one of 8 or 9 different criteria. I would agree. I think for us it's one of the most important. What are the impacts of council's decisions on the most vulnerable in the city is extremely important. So I would agree that it needs further attention.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Polanyi? All right, thanks very much. Appreciate your being here. Paul Codd. Hello, Mr. Codd.
Hello,
Welcome.
I'm Paul Codd, and this is my sister Maureen. I live in East York. I belong to an organization called Commitment to Community. They embrace the feeling that if one person in the village is hurt, then everyone is hurting. Don't you? I am here today to urge you to include funding for the city's poverty reduction strategy in the city's financial plan. The poverty reduction strategy is very important to the growth of our city. The way we treat our most vulnerable is how we as a society will be judged. I'm involved with a group called ACTO. This year we sent 2 delegates to a United Nations conference in Geneva, Switzerland. The Canadian contingent was extremely loyal, with hopes of putting forward a credible showing. The conference was about housing and homelessness. On both items, Canada's treatment of its citizens was found to be scandalous. Is this the best Canada can do? Hopefully not. This year, the police will receive an operating budget of $1 billion. People that break the law get warnings, fines, or jail time. The police get their criminality. For their criminality, get rewarded. Perhaps my language might seem too strong, but I feel it's not strong enough. A police commissioner that condones carding and isn't censored for the racist behavior exhibited by himself or his police officers is disgraceful. When I was at Occupy, the police chose to assault natives as well as transies. At the G20, countless amounts of people were kettled and assaulted. Sammy Yatim and Andrew Loku were murdered by Toronto's finest. Yet the mayor and his city councillors reward those that have created so much mayhem. Have you no shame? What the city needs is a poverty reduction strategy It helps people get out of the endless purgatory of hopelessness. People need affordable housing as a reality, not a pipe dream. Transit rates need to be reduced or forgiven for the poor, disabled, and the elderly. Childcare also needs to be more affordable and accessible. In conclusion, I would like to thank all the activists, humanists, and idealists for striving to make this a better world. Again, I'd like to thank the Executive Committee for allowing me to speak. Have a good day. But before that, I must add one thing. I belong to a lot of organizations who do some very good work. So if anything is going to happen to me as a result of giving this speech, do it to me, not the organizations that I belong to. Again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Codd. Any questions of Mr. Codd? All right. Thanks very much for being with us today.
Have a great day.
Mr. Derek Moran, please. Welcome, Mr. Moran. You have 5 minutes.
As I understand it, Mayor Tory, Mr. is a term of Admiralty Maritime jurisdiction that refers to a subordinate inferior. If I've ever led anyone in this room to believe I'm a Mr., then that would be a mistake, and to please forgive me.
Welcome, Derek Moran. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. You weren't here 2 years ago.
That's right.
That's right. And I just want to let you know of something that the Integrity Commissioner at the time, Janet Leiper, law bencher of the Law Society of Upper Canada, probably 2 years ago this very month said to everyone, I guess, in City Hall chambers, something very brief about, like a subtle warning that everyone should be careful with the people's trust and resources. The people's trust and the people's resources. And I brought this up at the consultation in October, where I asked a question that Peter Notaro hasn't gotten back to answer me with yet. Like, I understand what that all means. Like, that means you guys are the trustees, and if it's a trust involved, that means that we, the people, are the beneficiaries. So I just want you to take notice, Mayor Tory, that it says clearly in the Constitution we have that everyone has the right to the security of the person and the right not to be deprived thereof. If that sounds familiar, we kind of, I don't know if you remember us speaking at Minister Joe Oliver's Canada Day picnic a couple years ago. Before we spoke, I spoke to Minister Oliver, and I asked him straight out. I said, is it true, Minister Oliver, that the security and the security of the person mentioned in the Constitution is of a financial nature? And I have to apologize to him right now on the public record, because I just expected him that he would lie to me, based on who his boss was at the time. But he said, yeah. He said, it's part of it. It's, there's also the military, CSIS, the police, someone else I'm forgetting. So, but when I reiterated, I said, but it has the security of the person. It's financial in nature. He said, yeah, but it's part of it. So then we spoke, and I asked you, we're talking about Mayor Ford, and I said, do you know what the law actually is? And you said, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, do you know what the default jurisdiction law in Ontario is? And you said, well, what I was fishing for was, the common law rules of equity. What you said was, well, I would say whatever it says in the Constitution. So we just went over security of the person. As a result of the security of the person, the evidence of which is the birth certificate, and that's why there's a CUSIP number on the back of it, usually in red. As a result of that, the security of the person, and as Councillor Matlow now knows from his budget town hall last year, there is actually no law that has a valid application that says any man or woman has to pay property taxes. He said he would look it up for me. That was a year ago. Instead, what he did was block me on Twitter and Facebook. So, but that's Councillor Matlow for you. This is the remittance. This is what comes at the bottom of every bill from the City of Toronto. This is a credit item. Rob Rossini and I knows that we had a conversation at the end of Councillor Greb's budget town hall meeting last year, and I asked him, do you know what this is? And he said, yes, I do. But it became soon apparent that he doesn't know what this is. He didn't, in the end, I had to explain to him what this was. And what he said to me was, but Derek, how do we get the money? He stumped me. Like, I shouldn't have to tell the CFO of the City of Toronto how you guys get paid. Nobody at the City of Toronto seems to have an answer for who financial institution number 900 is. You take this, you put it into your bank at the Royal, Rob told me you guys deal with the Royal Bank. Their financial institution number is 003. They put the money into your account, like it says in Section 336 of the City of Toronto Act. Now they're out like $1,000. So the Royal Bank then takes this negotiable instrument. They send it over to whoever this mysterious financial institution number 900 is. They reimburse the Royal Bank to make them hold, and because of the security of the person, and the whole idea that the Crown came here so they could sell off all of our natural resources and not share it, that'd be kind of greedy, but they didn't do that. So your instructions, Mayor Tory, are to make sure that City of Toronto Treasurer Mike Saint-Amant does not prevent my father from being able to discharge with the remittance any debt incurred from the City of Toronto.
Derek Moran, thank you very much. And are there any questions for Derek Moran? Okay, thanks for being with us. Next is Shirley Bush. Ms. Bush, welcome to City Hall.
I have to make sure the chair doesn't get away from me here.
They're just helping behind you there. I think we're all set. And you have 5 minutes
You're very welcome.
to make your presentation.
Yes. Now, this is lightweight compared to some of the heavy things that you've heard. However, I am a Toronto-born senior, and I love my city with a passion. I have attended many city council meetings, and I am very aware of the councillors who feel the same way. They vote for what is best for the people. And I've watched this for a long number of years. Anyway, having read the long-term plan on my computer and having a headache at the end of it, two things immediately came to mind. The first, the vehicle tax, which was canceled by Mayor Ford. I do think it should be restored as fast as possible right now. It's a good revenue tool. I not only think it should be restored since it brings close to $100 million, I would applaud doubling it. That's the vehicle tax. The second is about saving the city from a disastrous future expenditure which it can ill afford. It could be averted by immediately cancelling Mayor Ford's Hybrid 3 for the Gardner East, which will cost about $1 billion. The remove option, I was at City Council when this came up. The remove option already had complete approval of all the waterfront councillors and many more, including former mayors Sewell, Crombie, Eggleton, and former city planner Bedford, and prominent members of the Architects Association. And it would cost less than half of the hybrid solution. Unfortunately, a study of Mayor Tory's hybrid won in council by 2 votes. It took almost 2 days of arguing, but it did. 2 votes, it passed. Later, the 3 hybrid examples were exhibited at the reference library. None seemed to me as sensible and practical as remove, which I had carefully studied. I found it totally incomprehensible later when I was at the 5-member Property and Development Committee headed by Jay Livingston that they voted unanimously for hybrid. What was the rationale? I still do not understand, and I have read, I have talked to people, I have done my very best to find out why. And that is going to cost around $1 billion. It's a ridiculous, unnecessary expenditure. And also, in view of the Liberal Party's interest in cost effectiveness for their waterfront commitments, it wouldn't surprise me if they chose to cut back after Toronto's spendthrift decision. 9 Toronto area MPs have already expressed disapproval to Mayor Tory. It seems unpleasant and immoral to spend extremely lavishly and unnecessarily when things like libraries, children's care, and other services are threatened. I appreciate the hard work that went into this report. I think it was a very detailed and I'm sure difficult to produce one. But I feel that there are 2 things. One I learned at my father's knee as a child, and that was there's no such thing as a free lunch. And the other was for every plus, there's a minus, and you have to decide which really matters. I think that any unnecessary spending in the City Council should be eliminated. And I feel that very strongly. I've spoken to a number of people, and they felt the same way. When you have parks, playgrounds, community centers, policing, libraries, roads, emergency services, all requiring millions of dollars, how can you possibly spend any money unnecessarily?
On that note, I will thank you because the 5 minutes are just past, and see if there are any questions for you, Ms. Bush. Seeing none, I will thank you very much for taking the trouble to be here today and for all your ongoing interest in what we're doing. Thank you so much.
May I help?
It's okay.
Hamish Wilson.
Okay, sorry.
Mr. Wilson, you know the rules, and we welcome you, and you have 5 minutes.
Yes, sir. Good morning. Thanks for being here. And also some thanks to the staff for raising this rather necessary set of issues about how we actually might go forward and pay for things. Certainly I have a sense that we've got what I would call chironic denial about how much we actually subsidize automobiles, aka mobile furnaces. And they're better off as sources of heat than they are as mobility often. This is an old little paragraph from the Globe of January 10th, 1996. I've been sharing it pretty consistently over the decades. I think it's a very important strategic paragraph. From Vancouver, Ken Cameron's, the region's senior planner, quote, "We realize that the public subsidy enjoyed by the private automobile amounts to $2,700 per automobile per year, or about 7 times the amount we subsidize public transit." Now, I know this may not be a popular topic, especially amongst the car-servatives. I think we tend to have a car-servative council because, yes, when you live in a lower density area, like the suburbs that tend to dominate this council and this committee, you don't want to necessarily disturb the status quo or status car, and yet the costs really are substantial. The amount of space that they occupy, the drainage of all the asphalt, we don't really know how many, well, thousands of meters, square thousands of meters we actually have as storm that needs servicing by storm drains. There's also the pollution. There's the parking issues. Something from this is the reason that this article actually emerged was something from Dr. Pamela Blais. She came out with a book called Perverse Cities about the economics of urban form. Highly recommended. At least in this council, we tend to have interest in books and knowledge, I think, much greater than we have In the past, on page 146, given the magnitude of parking costs as suggested by the estimates of the above, this amounts to a subsidy of hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars annually, just as one example. With the drainage, one of the unfunded items is actually doing things with the Don River flooding. 70% of that storm surge is from stormwater, from asphalt. So what about disconnecting driveways, not just having a berm built? We've got to think of asphalt taxes. We've got to think about disconnecting for permeable pavement upstream, in the Lawrence Park upstream, everywhere upstream. We've also got issues with the pollution from vehicles, including the carbon dioxide emissions. And this intersects as well. We've got something called climate change. This is from the ECO, the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario. He's had a wonderful thing called Looking for Leadership. There's such a problem with climate change. This isn't really factored in or mentioned in this report. I think that's a bit of an oversight because, quite honestly, if you think about the conditions under which, say, a roof has to operate in, there's an awful lot of physical stress from the extremes of temperature and climate that we have, just even in a normal thing, let alone the extreme events. So there's going to be a heck of a lot of extra surge in expense from the extremes that are underway. They are totally underway. And you can't necessarily, because of that, expect that the senior levels of government are going to be happy to just open up their wallets like this big fire. What is that going to do for our national greenhouse gas emissions, which is they're already well ahead of where we need to be? So the transport sector has led our emissions for quite a while. And yet, I don't think we're doing a lot of the smarter things here in the city. Keep it simply surface, I think, in Scarborough. That would be one thing. So I'm not a fan of the large-scale subway. I think there are options that need to be pursued. I favor doing diagonal things on existing corridors. We own that that slices through Scarborough. There's also the Don Valley corridor and things down there. So if we want to squeeze the billions, I think that's a really good spot to do it. And I favor busways, and there's a lot of sense to doing diagonal things as well. This is an interesting thing, the merits of diagonality, as I would call it, from the London subway network. Also, transit relief by better biking. From the London Mayor's Transport for London's the Mayor's Vision for Cycling in London, March 2013. Suggestion, where is it? You might be relieved the stretch of an underground by as much as 10%. So we need to have bikeway relief of transit. This is an excellent book as well.
And I'll have to stop you there.
That's
5 minutes, and
privatize the gardener.
We appreciate your submissions as always, Mr. Wilson. Are there any questions of Mr. Wilson? Okay, thank you, Mr. Wilson. Yep. Jessica Bell, TTC Riders. Ms. Bell here. All right. Steve Barnes, Wellesley Institute. Mr. Barnes, welcome.
Thank you.
You have 5 minutes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So my name is Steve Barnes. I'm the Director of Policy at the Wellesley Institute, which is Toronto's health policy think tank. So we work with communities and government to help to develop research and policy that improves health by focusing on the social determinants of health, because they, of course, are vital to the health of Torontonians. So we welcome the report in front of you today. We think it's a really important opportunity for us to consider the long-term financial direction of the city, but of course also how to build the type of city that we want to live in. So the city manager has done an excellent job of setting out some of the what for you in terms of the nature of the challenge and the scale of the challenge ahead. What I'd like to focus on is a little bit of how the decision needs to be made going forward from here. But first, just by way of context, I just want to set up that the way that the city raises revenue matters to our health. And partly that matters because of the services that you provide. And of course, many of the services are available and used by all Torontonians, but many city services are used by Torontonians who are perhaps more marginalized or vulnerable and who fare poorly in the social determinants of health. So the services that you run are critical to the health of our city. And they can level the playing field among people in our city as well. Beyond the services themselves, the way that revenue is raised can also impact health. So just last week, we released a think piece looking at some of the revenue tools that are available to the City of Toronto and looked at them from a health and health equity perspective. Just to give you an idea of a couple of the things that we found that implementing a tobacco tax of 5% could lead to a 2% decrease in tobacco consumption and 7,500 fewer smokers in Toronto. We found that a 5% alcohol tax could reduce alcohol consumption by 2%. And we found that a mix of vehicle and road pricing mechanisms could improve public health through fewer vehicles on city roads and less air pollution. That's all a useful story for you to know as you consider your next steps. We also found, however, that these particular revenue tools could be regressive. Of course, when you implement a tax at a flat level, everyone pays the same amount. And we might find that by using some of the revenue tools available to the city, that lower income and vulnerable and marginalized populations may actually experience increased hardship. Now, this doesn't mean that we shouldn't consider new revenue tools. As the city manager's report makes clear, there's a pressing need to consider new ways to ensure stable operating funding for the services that the city provides. The solution, however, is that we need to consider equity in tax policy and the city's long-term financial planning. Not all groups are affected equally by the decisions that this committee and that council make about managing expenses and revenues. For example, a service reduction on a bus route would affect a single mom living in the inner suburbs differently than somebody who is living downtown. And similarly, $1 of revenue raised through something like a vehicle registration tax would have a different impact on on a low-income newcomer family in Scarborough, for example, than a Canadian-born professional couple living downtown. So our proposal to you is that there's a number of lenses that need to be applied to this decision going forward around the city's long-term financial direction, including social equity, health, and health equity lenses. But perhaps most importantly, the case I'd really like to make is that we need to hear from Torontonians about what type of city we want to live in and how we're going to afford to pay for it. The city manager's report did talk about meaningful input and discussion with residents and businesses in the city, and we welcome that. What I'd ask from the committee today is some more clarity about how that would happen. I think because the forums where we often have these discussions are at City Hall, I think that from the poverty reduction strategy, there were some really interesting ways of getting out and speaking to Torontonians about the types of services that were valuable to them. I think taking a similar approach to the long-term financial direction of the city would be worthwhile and valuable as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barnes. Councillor Davis.
I'm glad you've talked about the consultation. I was going to ask Mr. Polanyi and didn't get there. So it is almost silent, or it certainly isn't robust, the discussion about how we engage communities. So could you just expand on how you think we should engage communities in this discussion and what the first principles might be that we're going to be asking citizens?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to services, the first principles ought to be that the people who use services ought to be consulted, but there also needs to be consideration given to people who maybe would benefit from the services who don't necessarily know that they exist, or might face barriers to accessing them. For example, not being able to afford a TTC fare to get to a community centre. The poverty reduction strategy consultations were useful and productive in that regard, and the ongoing work around the transit fare equity strategy has built on top of that as well, where I think they're called community animators, are sent out into different parts of the city to actually engage with people who might not otherwise come into contact with city staff or decision makers. I think taking that model is sensible and prudent. On the revenue side, of course, we all pay for our city, whether we're owners or renters or however. I think there's a need perhaps to consider, online consultations, those types of broad-based consultations for the discussion that we need to have on revenue.
You mentioned the report that was released last week, and I'm sorry I haven't read it. yet. I will go and find it. But you talk specifically about alcohol and cigarette tax. I know when we looked at this the first time, there were some significant and real challenges on the collection side and on the tax room that was available on both of those taxes. So I wondered if you could tell us why you believe we should pursue those.
So to be clear, I don't think we necessarily should pursue those. We looked at some of the revenue tools available that could have a health benefit. So of course we know that there's harms associated with alcohol and tobacco, which is why we looked at those. The challenge with alcohol and tobacco taxes is that they can actually increase health inequities, because people who are lower down the socioeconomic ladder often will continue to smoke even in face of the higher prices, whereas people who have more resources can purchase the support and guidance and so on. And that's well established in the health literature. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't consider taxes like that. I'm not saying that those are the only ways to go. I just think that the most appropriate way to consider revenue tools going forward has to include a health and health equity lens, so that these types of details can be teased out as we think about the tobacco and alcohol taxes, but also as we think about the broader range of taxes that are available.
Okay, it needs to be on the list of
Absolutely.
Criteria. It also should presumably be on the list in terms of criteria we use to assess any budgetary reductions in expenses.
Absolutely. I would agree with that. And of course, for people with low income, and in particular, services are as good as income or cash in many cases. And the city provides a huge variety of services that have real material benefit for people. Childcare is a very good example of one where people can go and work in paid employment as a result of having a childcare space. But I think it's also important to keep in mind the value of things like libraries and community centers to people's overall well-being, community connectedness, social cohesion, and so on.
One of the challenges we have, of course, is that the provincial government funds, in many cases, 80% of many of the services that are critical to addressing health inequalities and access to a range of services. Do you have any thoughts about how we might engage the province in this discussion? Because without their funding to match or at least to cost share, it's very difficult for the city to look at expansion or growth. I know we're talking about how do we fund existing services, but I think we ought to be also looking at unmet needs in the city. How would we engage the provincial government?
Yeah, I agree with you, and fundamentally it's a political question. So I'll give my best attempt at an answer. Where I know that the province, of course, has many areas where more investment is required. I also know that the province has said that before they'll consider supporting municipalities to do particular things, municipalities have to use some of the revenue generation powers that are available to them. So perhaps an opportunity going forward is to consider some of the revenue generation, the revenue tools on the table right now, and use that as a point of entry and leverage in speaking with the province.
Thank you.
And are there any other questions for this deputant, Mr. Barnes? Okay. If there aren't, we'll move along then. And thank you very much, Mr. Barnes, and move on to Mr. Robert Wardlaw. You have 5 minutes, sir. Welcome.
Thank you. Good day to you all. My congratulations to all the executive committee members for their patience. It makes a long morning. We are here to think about the long-term finances of the city, and I'd like to speak to an issue that concerns all of us. That's the well-being of our neighbors, especially those with less or nothing. I'm the minister at Glen Roads United Church, Gerrard and Coxwell area, in the East End, where the congregation believes sharing food and working for justice go together. It provides one of the 150 or so food banks operating around the city. At the heart of the Christian faith and many other faith traditions is concern for the poor, Poverty and the poor get something like 2,000 mentions in the Bible, always with a strong message to non-poor people to give them food and give them justice. So upstairs at Glen Rhodes, we have a ritual of sharing food called communion. Everyone is invited to the communion table. Everyone gets the same portion. We call that food sharing upstairs a sacrament, a revealing of the grace of God. Downstairs in the church hall, the congregation has been feeding people every month and giving away groceries every week for 3 decades since the advent of trickle-down economics. Volunteers put in almost 8,000 hours doing this each year, the equivalent of 4 full-time jobs. The only thing that seems to have trickled down in our neighborhood all this time, by the way, is growing inequality. What we're doing upstairs is not sustainable, not for the clients and not for the providers. The church members are aging out. We're also getting tired seeing the numbers grow each year. Upstairs, communion is a happy occasion, a celebration. Downstairs at the food bank, no matter how hard the volunteers try, it's often tense and never a celebration. First-time people are humiliated to be there. If you've never had to use a food bank, never been to one, I certainly suggest that you go and do that and live for 3 days on what you receive. Many people there at the food bank are glum. Most are impatient to get their few bags of food. Everyone recognizes this is no sacrament. There is charity happening, but no justice. We have figured out as a church that it's costly to us as a community to address poverty this way. It's short-sighted. Here is where we as a city can do something about that. Here's where we can shape our city. City Council adopted excellent poverty reduction strategies last fall to ease this terrible problem in Toronto. Now we need to fund them and more besides. And you've heard the list of that which needs additional funding, housing, childcare, food insecurity, and so on. Those things not only make people miserable, but the lack of these social services hamper them from staying healthy, and for those who have the capacity to go back to work, makes that a real obstacle for them. Now is the time to increase the taxes the rest of us pay to fund programs that will make a difference. We want to make sure that the sharing of food and the celebration of equality feels more like upstairs than downstairs for everyone who calls Toronto home. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reverend Wardlaw. Are there questions for the Reverend? Thank you very much for being here today. Much appreciated. Jim Neff. Jim Neff. Okay. Mr. Neff's not here, it appears. That brings us to Sharon Goodyear, C2C Research Committee, Bathurst United Church. Ms. Goodyear? Sharon Goodyear? Okay, then Henrik Beckman. Mr. Beckman?
If I could ask technical support to, I do have some overhead slides.
Yep.
Oh, there he is. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. As soon as we get you hooked up there, you have 5 minutes.
I must say I'm very impressed with the quality of the presentations this morning. Good variety, good depth.
They've been good.
Should I move over? Yeah. Just to move things along a little bit, I'm a software developer, and for the past few months I've been working on a project called the Budgetpedia project through Civic Tech Toronto. I'll move chairs if you can get that going. And the purpose of the Budgetpedia project is to make Toronto's budget more accessible to the people of Toronto. It's a volunteer effort, essentially. So I have an interest in this. Sorry, I'm just going to move here. Oh, seems we're having trouble. And my interest actually goes back about a decade in terms of budget matters and the culture of the civil service. Looks like we're having trouble here. Madam Clerk, there are a couple of, in my written submission, there are a couple of graphs near the end of it. When the time comes, would you be able to bring that up on the screen? Not with me, but clerk may have it. In the interest of time, let me just go ahead.
All right,
we
thank
seem
you.
to be having some
I think that's what we should
technical
do.
difficulties here. I apologize for the confusion. So, with that introduction, just for the record, also, I am speaking just on my own account and not on behalf of any other group or organization, although I do have some affiliations. I wanted to address in particular recommendation 3 of the report, which contemplates a business transformation program that modernizes the processes within City Hall, essentially modernizes the civil service. And my main point is that it turns out that the Toronto Civil Service is actually quite well paid these days. If you look at the numbers going back to amalgamation forward and take into account inflation and modest growth of the civil service, it turns out that today's civil service is being paid about a third more on an inflation-adjusted basis than the civil service around the time of amalgamation. My take on that is that that's actually a good thing, because it means that we have a well-paid civil service at a time when we actually need one to implement, for example, the types of innovations and programs that the city manager is talking about. I would say, however, that there's a burden on the city to modernize, to in fact follow through on this recommendation 3 and modernize the city's organization. That would be good for everyone, to justify the pay level, to justify the revenue increases that are coming up, and to prepare for the numerous pressures that the city is going to face over the next while, many of which we've heard about. I'm talking about constructive change here. I don't have time to go into the details. There is some information in my written submission, but in general, to move from the old hierarchical command and control model more towards a flatter, more agile and open system based on small group dynamics. And Mayor, I did hear you speak at the Startup City meeting a while ago, where you were talking quite fervently about innovation in the city, and that's really what I'm talking about. There would be organizational benefits, obviously, in terms of better outcomes. We've heard speakers today talk about need for greater public engagement, and there are organizational tools available for that. There are also, I think it's important, political benefits for that. The public is often quite rightly skeptical about requests for additional revenue, and my contention is that if there is a very visible program of modernization of the civil service, that would go a long way towards making the potential increases in revenue and the changes in structure more palatable to the people of Toronto. There are a number of examples within the city of forward-thinking groups. The library, in my mind, stands head and shoulders above many. The transportation division is, I think, being quite innovative in some ways. The participatory budget that Councillor Carroll, I saw her before, is championing has some very good structure in terms of how to engage with the public. I would like to add my voice to those that caution against excessive use of user fees, because they do tend to be regressive rather than progressive, and just as important, exclusive rather than inclusive. And I think we want a civic sense, a civic pride that is inclusive, to generate the kind of atmosphere that will lead to a dynamic economy. So, Madam Clerk, if you could possibly, I don't know if you have that, if you could possibly show the chart that I have on the top of page 3. Yes. Okay. Sorry for that delay. If you look at the top chart, where I got these figures is that from the year 2000 on, in the audited financial statements, there is a note to each of those called expenses by object, which recasts the statement of expenses according to the categories that you see there. And so what I've done is taken all those numbers, applied inflation adjustment to them, and what you see is that there's a continuous and rather dramatic rise in salaries, wages, and benefits in that period up to about 2010, which is the period that the city manager mentions is when things start to settle down. And I've recreated the chart at the bottom as a stack chart to make it a little more comprehensible. If you'll excuse me just a moment, I just want to flip pages here.
I think we're just, if we just could take 2 seconds on this last
Absolutely.
graph, then we'll have to move on.
My apologies.
30 seconds maximum, sir.
Okay. So you'll see from this slide that that the salaries and wages have actually gone up 42% on an 41%, I'm sorry, on an inflation-adjusted basis since amalgamation, whereas budgeted staffing levels have gone up about 10%. So this is why I say, in real terms, the pay of our civil service has actually gone up by about a third. And I'm celebrating that as a good thing because, you know, with your forward thinking, Mayor, and a well-paid civil service with the implicit capabilities, we should indeed be able to go through a substantial and ambitious modernization program.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I apologize for all the disruption.
Not at all. We appreciate that. Any questions of Mr. Beckman? All right. Well, thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the deputations for this item 15.1. Just to remind committee members of what we will do. We will, first of all, we've had some discussion just about, given that there are 30 deputations listed for the Expo matter, that we would limit those. We couldn't do it partway through the financial thing because it would create an unfairness for those who had spoken earlier and those who spoke later. But we can for the Expo matter, and I gather there was some interest on the part of committee members in having that limit set at 3 minutes. And I would entertain a motion to moved by Councillor Pasternak, seconded. All those in favour, opposed, carried. So those deputations will be 3 minutes. But to remind, after lunch we'll come back and deal with item 15.8, which has to be dealt with at a specific time for means of complying with our statutory requirements. That's a development charge complaint, 165 Yorkland Boulevard, and there'll be a deputation on that. And then we'll move strictly back to item 15.1 and begin with questions to staff and then speeches on that. And then we go to the Expo, to the mega bidding matter after that. And so we will reconvene at 1:30. Thank you.
Yep.
You should think about it. It's when you have like 50 people. Okay.